Sudden death crept up on the main character in a way he had never imagined his own resurrection. Again, Almas found himself in another world. Perhaps it was the afterlife, but there was neither the Sansiu River nor the familiar flower garden they talked about. At first he was consumed by unbearable hunger. He even thought about chewing the leaves nearby. Later, he decided to look for food around. He held in his hands a freshly caught fish and a beetle that looked quite scary. Almas thought he was already dead, and perhaps for the first time in his life he could finally just eat his fill. When Almas ate something alive, a cold horror gripped him, and later this fear only grew. Almas sat confused, unable to understand what had happened. He had died earlier in a car accident near the river. By the river he stood in horror and looked at his reflection in the water. Almas did not recognize the face looking at him. Suddenly it flashed through his mind. Hadn't he already died, and at the same time was still alive, reborn as someone else? He thought that maybe this was a rebirth into another world, or more precisely, a transmigration of the soul. Almas decided it was just a dream, and holding on to this thought, fell asleep hoping to wake up in a hospital bed, believing the accident was just a minor collision. The next morning, Alams instantly rushed to the stream to look at his reflection. He needed to accept that he had ended up in another body. Almas, full of optimism, rushed to prepare the essentials to survive in this forest. A griffin appeared, gently called, and instantly left its territory. It saw its reflection and shuddered with fear, and the griffin spoke mockingly, as if saying it was very picky about food and would not bother with that terrible griffin meat. It thought again about how it was thrown into this strange world hungry. Last night it had to eat insects to survive, and now it was desperately shouting at another's body. Everything in this world seemed abnormal. It sincerely apologized to the griffin for entering its territory, and everyone talked about that contract between griffins and humans. Even children knew about it. It asked the griffin to confirm its suspicion and said that its presence would save it if the explanation made sense. The griffin, although deep down it would not believe, had to protect its own life, so Almas decided to tell the truth. His soul had inhabited this body without the knowledge of the forest and the owner himself, and the griffin listened until it understood that Almas was lost. It apologized and again begged Almas to adapt to the new world and start hating his own. If he hoped for anything after that conversation, it would be a sad fate. The griffin agreed to stay with him, but on one condition. He needed Almas's help. The griffin led Almas to a huge cave where little grifflings were crowding and looking at him confused. They asked what it meant. The griffin explained that these were his relatives, and for some unclear reason, people had recently been leaving their children in the forest he created. Almas pondered his own body. Had he also been thrown there once because of hunger? He asked the griffin if his task was to take care of these children, and the griffin, praising him for quick orientation, asked him to look after them until they learned to care for themselves. He did not refuse the children from the shelter. He understood them, but the problem was food, so the griffin, understanding his concerns, promised to provide food for 3 years, after which Almas and the children would have to adapt and find food themselves. Almas was surprised. He thought the griffin would tell them to eat insects, and some even thought he was asking why those children were saved, to which the griffin replied with a question: "Would you leave hungry and helpless children alone?" and said that having saved them once, he must see the matter through to the end. Almas noticed a small pile of fruits in the cave and suspected that Griffin had brought them. The fruits were very different, and Almas felt that Griffin needed his help because he did not know how to treat him as a human. Almas nodded and, quietly whispering, "Understood," agreed to take care of the children from now on. He turned to the children and loudly announced, "From now on I am your leader." The children responded, but Almas stood confused. He did not understand their language. Griffin apologized and explained that someone from another world had ended up here, so he could not make out their words. Although he was here, thanks to divine blessing, he could communicate with Almas. Griffin offered to lend Almas his protective power of sacrifice to Almas. This sounded like an incredible power from a fantasy world, and receiving help, he was surprised to find that he now naturally spoke and understood the language of the strange children around him. Suddenly, as if by a miracle, everything became clear. A boy named Ron stepped forward and called himself the current leader. Almas seemed indifferent, but gladly greeted him and began asking names around, until Ron got angry and approached Almas, saying that he did not recognize him as leader. Almas laughed, realized how suddenly the boy felt like the new leader, approached to apologize, and explained that Ron did not mean harm. He was just a bit foolish. Almas watched a group of homeless children. At first glance they seemed happy, but he felt their smiles hid pain. He promised to protect them and was already thinking of starting a farm so they could survive here. He had little knowledge of agriculture, but he saw no other choice. Griffin warned that he would help only for 3 years, so 31 children, and Almas had to manage to become independent by that time. Ron skeptically remarked whether Almas even understood how hard it was to work the land. Especially in a dense forest, here you simply cannot do without trees. The biggest problem was finally solved. It turned out these were children who barely knew how to hold tools, and the feudal Lady Rose pressured Almas to give up. Grem disagreed. He said there was no other plan, rejected the childish idea of fighting, and ordered to look for tools for working the land, because with the right equipment everything would be easier. Almas brought a huge pile of swords left by foolish warriors. He knew many heroes came to defeat Griffin, but Griffin himself, stunned by the amount of weapons, complained and was irritated because these abandoned swords spoiled his forest tetra. He stepped forward and asked if Almas intended to exchange this weapon for agricultural machinery from Uriel. A spark lit in Ron's eyes when he suggested instead using the weapons to buy food, but Almas ignored him again, and Ron wondered if anyone knew this area. Tetra replied that yes, and excited vividly described where they were. They were in the Romelia forest in the east, the Kingdom of Roses, to the northwest, the Kingdom of Gilbd, to the northeast, Domerga, to the north, Faldarm. In Roses they were bad at making iron tools. Domerga and Gilbd would use hunger to attack Faldam. This was their chance, because this weapon was valuable and could be sold for a high price. Almas rejoiced this was a great opportunity to sell weapons at a good price, and then exchange the proceeds for agricultural tools. They talked about rice planting and planned everything with Griffin, who said that 30 years ago people lived in the nearest forest, but abandoned it due to an epidemic attributed to its curse. Griffin picked up Almas and flew to look for a place, and the terrain itself suggested it was more convenient to use an already existing plot than to clear a new one. Almas was glad when he found that the village had clean water. Only a few small repairs remained to be done. And most importantly, a free, prepared plot of land where rice could be planted. He sincerely thanked Griffin for finding a place better than expected, and Griffin indifferently waved it off, saying it was nothing special and not worth making a problem out of. The next day, Almas took the children there and explained the crop rotation plan. They would alternately sow clover and wheat in a 4-year cycle, but Ron doubted this, saying it would exhaust the soil and make it harder to patiently cultivate the land. Then Griffin explained to Ron and others that she would help restore nutrients in the soil so that it could be sustainably grown throughout the year. He also mentioned that manure from livestock would serve as fertilizer and further restore the soil. Sustainable actions of both livestock and land were the essence of all this, like a magical crop rotation. But there was a downside: the harvest fell because the land was divided into 4 parts for livestock, but a big plus, they got animals, and this was Rosewood's first step. Hearing this, Rosewood frowned and did not understand, so Almas briefly explained that crop rotation would give a better harvest than usual, encouraged everyone, and said their first task was to go to Ruru. Interested in what Almas was busy with for so long, Ruru pointed to a wasteland and with a smile suggested getting goats. They would survive even on bark, were easy to care for, even children could handle them, though they could not be called hardworking. He himself was more drawn to cows or horses, but had no experience with them, whereas goats were familiar to him. The shelter kept a domestic goat. Ruru doubted how urgently they needed to breed animals, and suddenly Griffin replied that goat milk, though unpleasant in taste, was extremely nutritious, rich in calcium, and balanced in nutrients. Almas turned to Ruru and asked if she understood what he had just said. Ruru smiled and nodded she understood. He was worried about everyone. Ruru listened to Almas's next plan, but loudly asked how they could even trade livestock amid terrible hunger. She disagreed and did not believe that the Kingdom of Roses needed a large stock of weapons. He quietly told himself that it was necessary to do this and asked Griffin to fly to a distant place. Griffin, without hesitation, agreed to bring back goats for Almas. Almas noticed that Griffin even knew how to talk to goats, although he knew that he was only leading them to the pen. When it was time to change goats, everything around seemed like real magic, and Almas took a bow with an arrow so they could practice shooting and then learn to hunt, but the children kept mocking him. After 10 minutes of shooting, he still did not hit the target. He sharply told the noisy children to quiet down and focus on their training. Others had already completed the challenge. The village was silent until Graham's time came. He drew everyone's attention and asked them to teach them how to live in peace, but their calm did not last long. Someone entered the village, and Almas heard Rosewood's alarmed scream. He thought that if a weak animal attacked Rosewood, he would drive it away, and if it was a stronger beast, he would figure out how to tear Rose from its paws. But when he came closer, he realized it was a man, and Rosewood loudly asked why he grabbed him, saying that his parents had already abandoned him, and added that even if he were caught, he would not give that man a crumb of food. He smiled sinisterly, contemptuously called Rosewood a fool, and said he knew about many steel swords owned by Almas's children. Finally, I deciphered his intentions. When they arrived there, he rushed to save Rosewood. He shouted to the child, "Run first," and stayed behind to hold back the angry man. The man got up from the ground, firmly holding a large branch, and with a mocking smile asked if Almaz was stalling so that Rosewood could escape. He teased him, telling him not to cry, and Almaz calmly asked why he was here. The man rattled and admitted that he came to steal the steel sword and exchange it for food. Almaz thought there was nothing to worry about because he was embarrassed by Almaz's reaction. The man asked another question, but Almaz suddenly stabbed him, and he had no choice. He had to tell the robber that they would not be responsible for his belongings. Pleasure and fear simultaneously pierced Almaz. He knew that the man would come if others found out about his feelings. Almaz reluctantly killed him there. Soon the children gathered around, worried, and asked, was Almaz okay? He reassured them he was fine and apologized for making them worry. Rose cried loudly. She was afraid that something bad might happen to Almaz. Almaz calmed the boy, assuring him that everything would be fine, although he himself was not used to such moments. Griffin came to assess the situation, and as if it were a trifle, indifferently said that this had happened before. He admitted that it was not simple, but reassured Almaz. Don't worry, interspecies violence happens not only among humans, it's like ants on the ground. Griffin's words were understandable, but unfortunately, they oversimplified human nature. He added that he was not Uriel for the creatures. It is hard for them to harm their own, and now Almaz's task was simple and important. To protect the children and return them to their group, that was their mission. Half a month passed, and although Almaz had troubles with the garden, finally everything settled down. Now their routine was to guard the field and take care of the essentials, food and shelter, and Almaz, already in a stable state, announced that he would go to the city for additional provisions. This time they headed to the Kingdom of Roses, to the capital of Roses, where the streets were packed with people. Almaz smiled happily. She had not seen such liveliness for a long time, and the bustling city turned out to be even more beautiful than she had imagined. Ron, like a true leader, was all fired up. He pointed to a clothing store and pushed Almaz to go take a look. Almaz was told to calm down, but immediately added that a little excitement was even good. It helps to notice each other on the street. Their first task was to find an exchange point, because without money you can't buy anything. Exchanging animal fangs for currency, Almaz bought some herbs. The nearest girl hurriedly asked, "Is this caramel grass?" She begged Almaz, sell her the potion and convince her that it is not a potion. She got it for free after a successful bargain. Almaz curiously asked why she intended to use it. Yuria explained that combined with marijuana, it gives an incredibly mild addiction, and Almaz became interested in her upbringing and asked where she was from. She vaguely replied that she lived in a village more than a day's journey from here, and asked to be shown where to find the valuable caramel grass. Almaz saw no benefit for himself in this and initially refused, but eventually they agreed that every month she would bring caramel grass to sell it for 1 gold coin. Before leaving, Yuria quietly whispered to Almaz that in the village she had received extraordinary protection, diligently studied the language of this world, and could communicate specially with Tetra and others, thanks to Griffin lending him language protection. But he knew that eventually he had to return it, and suddenly losing the ability to communicate would be a big problem. Almaz also began teaching the children basic arithmetic, and Ruru curiously asked what the benefit of his lessons was. She praised him for the question and explained that they need to learn not only farming, they must be able to trade goods for money. If they do not know arithmetic, merchants will easily deceive them in calculations. They can even become traders and start their own business, and children will have many options for the future. A month has passed since Almaz began teaching children arithmetic, and Petra, who was always first, took on the responsibility of teaching others. He approached Almaz and complained that at the lessons he was not treated specially and was treated unfairly, so Almaz decided to pay attention to him and teach him to count large numbers. Tetra asked if in his native country everyone could count, even the little ones, compared to her, but Almaz considered Tetra the most skillful. She had to memorize Arabic numerals and learn arithmetic. As promised last month, Almaz drank the herbal decoction and, without hesitation, set off to the city to meet with Yuria. During this journey, Almaz could not resist and decided to ask her in more detail about protection. Yuria in response asked if he was interested because he knew about her protection, and Almaz sincerely admitted that he really wanted to learn more about it. Yuria knew little, but the testimonies and documents of several fairies once again convinced her that they were truly good, and recognizing Almaz's protection was easy for her. Her own protection allowed her to see others' protective layers, the same eyes that looked through the blessings Yuria saw. Unfortunately, the king placed him under his protection and said, "The more people see him as a leader, the stronger his abilities will become." Almaz thought to himself that this means the children must recognize him as their leader. Almaz wanted to ask her a few questions. They say she lived on the lands of the Griffin Forest in Romalia and even dared to ask if she was not afraid of lice. Griffin, becoming alert, cautiously asked where he got the idea that they lived there. Yuria told that he sees from afar his protection was called Eyes of the Sky. He noticed people entering the forest and guessed that they settled there. Yuria asked Almaz to explain how he managed to avoid Griffin's curse, and Almaz honestly admitted. Actually, there is no curse now. Yuria understood this and promised not to tell anyone. When it was time for Al to ask why so many herbs and stones, Yuria said directly that he is a witcher, and a witcher can do many things. Cast curses, set magical barriers to remove spells, or brew powerful potions. Remember, Griffin said that the current disaster was caused by people through curses related to Yuria, and Yuria explained that the main culprit was a curse believed to have been cast by a high-level witch. Yuria believed that this was not the work of one person, perhaps the whole land was cursed, and such a disaster could have taken thousands of lives. He reassured Almaz, promising that he would not allow this to happen again. Almaz, surprised, asked if Yuria wanted to go to Ramalia, and Yuria gladly replied that he really wanted to, but had to ask his father because he would not go without permission. Thanks to Yuria selling herbs and the children gathering vegetables, they no longer worried about food, salt, and clothes were in abundance. Almaz decided to make them self-sufficient and taught them to make clay pottery. On the eve of the meeting at the shop, he asked what the most expensive item here was because he wanted to find something valuable to exchange for salt and clothes for Yuria. Looking around, he pointed to jugs completely different from the local ones, stronger, with brighter colors that the nobility liked. Returning to experiments, Almaz came across a closed oven in a hot room. Simply by blocking the chimney and limiting oxygen access, they easily fired black clay pots that could not be made in the open air. Unfortunately, now building an oven was too simple. He did not understand what the potter named Carisha Yuria meant, but closing the oven, he was sure that his products would be the best. Unfortunately, he announced to everyone that their goal now was to take up pottery, and if successful, their village would become the first to make its own products. Under Griffin's protection, everything became much easier for Almaz as winter receded and the new year approached. Griffin brought a group of new children he had with him and found in the forest, and Almaz looked at them, noticing that after this winter there were 10 more children. He became curious, so he asked Tetra how many types of taxes there were here. She replied that it depends on the country and its power, but usually there are 4. Almaz wondered if parents abandoned children in the forest to evade taxes, and inquired if all these children were from the Kingdom of Roses, because he knew that taxes in Roses were significantly lower. The King of Roses was not known for high levies. Roses, where did these children really come from? Soyan stood nearby and confirmed that this was so. All the people in Roses were incredible. The house of Duke Ash was betrayed by his own subordinates, and they even wanted to secede from Roses. The king would not tolerate this, and because of this, internal strife flared up in Ash's family. As a result, the people were left without money for the winter and lost considerable wealth. Due to this conflict, it was decided to introduce high taxes to compensate for the losses. When she heard this, Tetra asked again, and suddenly tears welled up in her eyes. She quietly whispered that she knew that her parents also loved her very much. Children cry, it's normal, but she always comforted them, no matter what. Seeing Tetra crying for the first time, Almaz froze in thought. Her future, the new children who had just arrived, so much needed to be considered before deciding what to do next while Tetra rested. Almaz quietly ordered the other children not to do anything strange and to behave normally. When she woke up, he suspected she would be embarrassed by her recent behavior on the appointed day. As always on this monthly day, Almaz went to the city to deliver herbal medicine to Yuria, and this time boldly asked if he could meet her father. He was a little surprised, but they said the father would be very glad to meet her friend, so everything would be fine. Almaz had thought about this before, but spoke about it only today. The Ramalia forest is surrounded by 4 countries, and the Kingdom of Roses is the most unstable. Clashes constantly break out there, so it would be much safer for the children to be under the protection of someone powerful. Almaz's father says that Yuria is the most suitable. She has enough strength. Of course, paying taxes is a bit annoying, but he and the children cannot always rely on Griffin's protection on the way home. Yuria was surprised. There were so many large houses around that he could not understand for a long time that this was the road to the Almi's palace. He silently wiped the sweat and asked Yuria if he was teasing him. Not funny. Yuria led him to the king himself. He froze in surprise, sincerely rejoiced at meeting Almaz, and thanked him for recently spending time with his daughter. Only then did Yuria remember to tell Almaz that her father was the King of Roses, and Almaz asked in a trembling voice why he was not told this earlier, as it was a real surprise. She knelt before the king, who sincerely felt honored to be here and also considered it an honor to be your friend. The king gently told her that there was no need to observe formalities. He just wanted to see her as a friend of his daughter. For the first time, he brought a friend home, a real wonder, because he was always immersed in studying magic and had no friends. But Almaz's visit was not only for that. She came to the king, and he said that he did so because she was a close friend of Yuria, so he was ready to help with anything. Almaz opened up and told the king the whole truth, and when he realized that his people had abandoned children in the forest, he felt he had to take care of them. Almaz clarified that he was not asking for protection or anything like that, to which the king replied that in any case, protecting subjects was his duty. Bowing his head low, he sincerely thanked Almaz for caring about the future generations of the people. Almaz could not believe that the king of this country himself had just submitted to him. The king declared that having Almaz's mother among his subjects was a great honor, promised to protect the people and their property with all his might. He himself believed that this would give the children a strong foundation for the future, and it somewhat reassured him. But the king had 3 requests. The first was that Almaz show him the village so he could personally verify whether Almaz's words were true. The second request was, do not part with remain her friend, and the last asked that Almaz teach mathematics to the princess who returned to the village. Almaz noticed Tetra has been behaving completely differently lately. She was always thoughtful, but something disturbed her peace, and not only she feels it, other children feel it too and begin to notice when something is really wrong. When Tetra is involved, such things cannot be left unfinished after all. These are just vegetables. He approaches her and whispers quietly, if you don't want to talk, I won't insist, but at least tell me what hurts. Tetra asks in surprise if he already knows, and Almaz replies that her pain is visible to anyone who looks at her, and promises that everything she says will remain a secret. He boldly declares that his name is Tetra Ash. Almaz suddenly realizes everything he has happened after he learned about the Ash clan's cleansing that he survived, and begins to suspect his connection to the Ash clan. Tetra asks if he is not surprised by this, and he admits that he is a bit stunned and did not expect to meet the daughter of the Ash clan here. After a moment of silence, he adds that regardless of his past or Tetra's current status, it will still belong to everyone. As if Tetra understood something and says, thank you, and I will quietly be sad. She says she knows her parents are no longer alive, but does not want to believe it. She constantly consoles herself with the hope that they were simply taken captive and cannot forgive the man named Robert Fermi. He was a close friend of her father. People loved him because he rose from humble origins to become noble, but he repaid them only with betrayal. Almaz, who understands her, asks Tetra if he wants Almaz to avenge her, and Tetra sharply says he wants to tear him into 100 pieces, but does not want to leave this place, and friends know Almaz understands. Tetra craves revenge for his parents, but does not want to lose his home and his people here. He, with tears in his eyes, assures him that no one will leave Tetra. His parents once told him the same. Then Almaz changes the subject. He insists that he himself must protect everyone here, even himself, and adds that Tetra is a smart girl, smarter than him. Feeling Almaz's thought, Tetra blooms with a happy smile and, hearing his serious words, promises to protect everyone. If she wants to take revenge, let her just say so, and he will help her as much as possible, because Almaz does not want her to do reckless deeds, as she is too important to everyone. Tetra shyly admits that she had never heard anything before, and Almaz adjusted his way of talking to her, making it more convincing so the problem is solved. Months and years flew by. Tetra relentlessly became better at writing, but soon they encountered a new obstacle, taxes. Especially after Griffin's support, as expected, ended after a month, Almaz's village had to become independent, and today he went to the king to discuss education. Surprisingly, the king asked if Almaz wanted to stop teaching his daughter or if he no longer liked her. The king warned that if Almaz left, the daughter would become a very lonely being, and Almaz, hearing a series of questions, hastily explained that he had no such intention. He just wanted to understand how long the king expected his teaching to last. The king replied that there was no clear term it would last until Almaz did this, and there was no one else left who could teach his daughter. Almaz asked with interest if Yuria had any friends besides him, and the king sighed sadly, saying no, only Almaz. He did not know why. Maybe Yuria was hostile to his family, although she was once very close to Almaz. When asked if the princess was allowed to communicate only with those who bring benefit, the king replied no. Yuria was of noble birth, but people often avoided her, and he himself did not understand this because the princess was kind. Moreover, in his opinion, she might have been touched by both curses and blessings. She was very skilled in dark arts, and it was no exaggeration to say that her gift had lived for 1,000 years, so the king even prophesied that one day his daughter would become the high priestess. He was also worried whether all this would turn out well, but the king waved his hand and reassured. Do not worry, the whole kingdom knew about the princess's talent and many other important things, and Yuria was the only thing that belonged to the king's daughter. This meant that her future husband would become the next king. This was exactly what ambitious people constantly sought, and Yuria could sense them from a mile away. Almaz wonders why the king does not hide that she is a princess so that he could be friends with ordinary people. The king sighed heavily and explained, it is very complicated. Everyone already knows who the princess is, so for safety, it is impossible for her to leave the palace. Although Yuria looks different on the outside, In reality, she is too shy, and the king tells Almaz that her case is an exception because the desire to find herbs overcame her shyness, and Almaz thinks about the reliable children in his village who have never seen her. She takes a risk and asks the king about her village. The king thinks for a moment and says that it is a good idea, but doubts whether the princess can really go there. Meanwhile, Yuria receives an invitation to Almaz's village, and she becomes its first official guest. She has already seen Ron and Rosewood several times, so now she wants to get to know others. Soyeon runs up to Yuria and Almaz and impatiently asks about their relationship. Yuria, laughing, says, "I am his girlfriend." As soon as she heard this, Tetra quietly nudged Almaz, and she immediately began to apologize and apologize. Bolton, the guard who came with her, laughed and said that she was too famous to her own detriment. Almaz looked at him kindly and replied that this was exactly what she expected from the princess's guard, showing that she trusted him. Almaz smiled lightly and asked if that was why Bolton's skills were more than enough to protect the king's only daughter. Bolton modestly asked not to praise him, saying he was just a drunkard standing nearby. Almaz felt that he had something else hidden somewhere. Tetra was closely connected with King Roses after all. She was the daughter of Princess Legos, and if the king found out, he would definitely call her personally. Almaz sincerely wanted Tetra to return to the Kingdom of Roses for her happiness, but Tetra herself did not want this. She did not want to get involved in politics. Almaz whispered that if Bolton found out about Tetra, everything could turn into real trouble. He doubted that Bolton would recognize her, since they last saw each other when she was only 10, but that no longer mattered. Bolton himself was the problem, and was now sitting next to them completely drunk. He stood watching. The children chatted incessantly, and he asked Almaz what he was going to play with them. After a short pause, Almaz threw out the idea. Let Yuria teach everyone in the village to use dark magic, and Bolton did not believe it, took it as a joke, and burst out laughing. How could someone who loves poison more than flowers behave normally? The truth was simple. Almaz was going to teach the villagers various ways to become more independent. He could teach them mathematics, but not black magic. In this world, it was important that some girls could become witches of black magic. Maybe men were not made for this, but if they could fight curses, it would be incredibly useful, and learning magic would also help Yuria get closer to Bolton's children. Standing next to Almaz, Bolton said that although he was a guard, he was also an ordinary person, so Almaz did not have to be so formal. Almaz agreed and asked if it was hard to become a guard like Bolton, but he denied it and said that King Roses did not care where you were from, only skills mattered for promotion. He was confident when Almaz grows up at least he will be taken into the civil service. If the boy turns out to be even more capable, they will give him land, because Bolton claimed that their country is unstable and needs help from outside, and the king, they say, is expecting something from Almaz. Almaz thought that becoming an official was a good idea, but only when the whole village becomes independent. A few days later, the king called him to the palace. He wanted to hear a report that Bolton had passed on about Almaz's harvest collection system, and since it had not been tested anywhere else, this was the main reason for the summons. Bolton arrived. The princess and Almaz, with shining eyes, showed a bunch of devices she had created. The harvest machine was an invention born during the revolution in Almaz's country, but he could not admit that he came from another world and had to honestly say that it had already been tested, and Almaz added that his fields do not follow the local 4-year cycle. The king asked if this was even possible for the country. The harsh truth was that on small plots the combine would not give full efficiency. Large lands and human support with real effort are needed, and the only way is to make them landowners. But this is terribly difficult due to political reasons, especially because of the influence of one wealthy family. The king changed the subject and announced that precisely because Almaz is a reaper, he will receive a gift from the king. Almaz asked for a horse to work in the field, and the Tsar, smiling generously, gave him 2 horses at once and a year of feed for free. Then he called his brother, and when all 3 gathered, the Tsar asked Almaz what he thought about how his country is organized. Almaz honestly said, "It is by no means strict. There are plenty of loopholes based on blood ties and control over territories." This role did not last long. Already in the 2nd or 3rd generation, it began to fall apart. The army and royal treasury are scattered throughout the country, and in the hands of powerful clans. In case of war, such a state would be difficult to govern. The king kept questioning Almaz if he had any idea how to bring order, and Almaz said that it was necessary to start with centralized power. The king agreed, and Raymond, his brother, was stunned that someone of such age could think that way. He turned to Almaz for advice whether this reform was really needed, and Almaz replied that first of all they need those trusted by the community, authoritative figures. For example, they could create a legend that the Razish family once became guardians of the gods, and during that long conversation, they also learned about the king's illness. Almaz directly asked the king how much time was left. The king Almaz must not know this. He thought it was like training, it would make him smarter and help solve the problem. After talking with the king Almas, he returned to the village with 2 horses, and Soyan was the first to notice this, loudly calling everyone to gather. The peasants rejoiced upon seeing the horses. Ron laughed and petted them, saying he was seeing such for the first time. The crowd's attention fell on a strange girl sitting on the back of a gentle horse, and Almas explained that her name was Ria, his servant. Because no one in the village knew how to care for horses, it required experience that Almas brought. The matter was brought before King Rose, and he thoroughly taught Ria how to care for the horses, and Almas asked to treat Ria as his own, while everyone cheerfully chatted. Grem came out of the forest with a large pig and loudly shouted, "I caught a wild boar." Ron froze in amazement seeing Grem carrying a large wild boar and asked who he was to scare people like that. Almas thought Grem was only 12, but his body was stronger than adults, and Grem told everyone not to do that and surprised them even more. He used a bow and arrows, so he had many muscles. Almas looked at the children with satisfaction how they all were growing up, smiled, and said the conversation was over, then returned to the field with 2 newborn horses, because they would have to work 3 times harder than usual. Soyan asked Almas if he was preparing anything else, and Almas replied that the marijuana that looks like marijuana mostly goes to voodoo. It is most often used to relieve pain. Here is a hemp seed, a small treasure, very nutritious because it is a round plant. After sowing it grows quickly. Even after harvesting, new plants can be planted as mentioned, and this hemp is also used for clothing. Almas told them that it would only be suitable for threads, but not for clothing. Whether it would be equally effective he did not know, because it was still an experiment, and Griffin would stop supporting the village after this summer, and taxes on village construction had increased, so if they did not find a solution, an economic crisis awaited them. The reason why new products had to be created was simple. Almas rushed to work explaining that wrapping paper was too fragile and easily damaged when folded, whereas folded sheepskin was much stronger. Wooden boards were also vulnerable because they were made in a standard size, and it was difficult to write long sentences on them, so something better was needed to preserve information. So Almas decided to make paper from available materials, and after a few days brought the finished product to the king, who kept praising his excellent work. Almas enthusiastically explains that this is a new product from the village and wants to present it to the king, and the king immediately agrees to buy this product. And he asked Almas if he could reveal the secret of papermaking, to which Almas feigned a headache, saying he did not care much but hinted whether the king would share the profits with the village. The king laughed loudly, said he was joking and there was no need to worry so much, and also promised to buy paper from the village for 3 years provided Almas improved its quality, and if in those 3 years he achieved the highest quality, the king would buy paper permanently and spread its production throughout the country. But there was one more condition: Almas could not sell paper to other countries, as he had predicted to the king. A year passed so that no one could instantly sell information to other countries. When Griffin stopped supporting the village, it fell into despair. I wonder if everything would have happened the same way if he had never met Griffin in the Griffin forest. Griffin praised Almas, saying that he led the village well and without any losses. Before leaving, Griffin earnestly asked Almas to come more often. Let him bring some alcohol if he is grateful for what Griffin did. Upon returning, Almas immediately gathered everyone and joyfully announced this year Enro's turned out to be generous, plenty of fruits and harvest. Like everyone else, those born in Rose Ice can now return to look for their parents if they want. Almas thought that there were so many children born in Rose Y in the village that if all of them suddenly decided to return to their families, he would lack working hands. But that no longer mattered. The children need their parents. The deal with Griffin ended, and these children have the right to return home. Rose shouted Almas's name and scolded him, calling him a fool. Almas did not understand her hints when Griffin removed his protection. It confused him. Rosewood repeated this again and again, though he loved his parents as if they had once abandoned him. He insisted, it doesn't matter if they are relatives' parents who abandon children are unacceptable. Ruru said that now they have more food, but there are no guarantees they won't be abandoned again, and Soyan added with a sad face that they could be abandoned or sold into slavery again. Rosewood shouted that they never thought of returning there, and everyone shouted in chorus that they adore Almas and will not go on such a wonderful day. Almas was called to supervise the Tetra group practicing magic, and he wondered if voodoo was always so boring. Ruru didn't care whether she watched or not, but today was an important lesson, so she shouldn't make noise and distract everyone standing next to Almas, and she whispered to herself, breaking the curse spells. Nearby stood some confused and completely incomprehensible Tetra, who was casting spells over something she called food additives. Almas wondered if it was really dangerous to eat what was created by magic, and gave everything to a passing herd of goats. Ruru looked at Almas with irritation and said that when she tried to make a tree wither with magic, the tree needed time to wither, and asked if something was wrong with her. As Ruru spoke, she became angrier and grumbled that nothing works the first time, and even if it did it would cost a lot of money and effort. Alma's understood nothing. She only hoped it would be useful to hear about the advantages. The children show off their skills a little. The first one, who threw animal fur over himself, proudly claims that it hides the body's scent, and a girl, jumping from roof to roof, smilingly says that it makes her invisible. Or she returns like an animal after hunting, jumps out of the bushes to show affection, giggles and says that Ruru never taught the girl that, then asks Almas to allow her, as always, to stop complaining about them. This has been since the beginning of their training, and adds that sometimes she feels like a little wild animal. Suddenly Alma remembers and loudly exclaims, "Actually, this is my technique. It's incredible how she can transfer her soul into any animal," and Ruru laughs loudly, saying that's not true, supposedly voodoo magic. Unfortunately, she doesn't care. She imagines an owl soaring high in the sky, believes it might be the most magical thing to achieve the goal, sees a funny scene where Soyeon no longer has a twisted neck like an owl. Can't hold back laughter and calls it a tragic coincidence in their magic study group, angrily asks if Almas is mocking them, and Ruru stands outside and tells the girl that she understands her feelings, but it's better to let it go. Almas has no choice, forced to sit in the corner and quietly whisper, pretending that voodoo is a very gentle magic. Ruru does not want Almas to tease her again, so she approaches and directly asks about fire magic. She once could create fire, but her village already has fire, so there is no point in wasting magic on everyday life. In a year, the village has noticeably changed for the better now. About 70 people from the kingdom of King Firm live here. Because of the burden of high taxes, they left, but the villagers found them unconscious in the forest and brought them back home. Petra informed Almas that among the newcomers there are 6 adults who get along well with Ron. They are strong, even cooked together. They enjoy using their farming skills and strength to expand the fields and harvest more crops, so the village now provides abundance for everyone, even more than Almas expected, and he gently says that everything is going well. And then he takes a big sip of forest wine to find the griffin. After taking a sip, Griffin smiled and said, "The wine is tasty, a simple sign that everything is fine in the village." Good, he is happy to the depths of his heart that they are now on their own and no longer depend on him. This is much better than if the children were dying of hunger. One day Griffin has to tell Almas something very important in case of trouble or invasion. If the children need help, Griffin will come to assist, but the final word remains with Almas. Almas sincerely thanks him, but hopes that this will never happen. Griffin also does not want this, and insists that Almas stay away from the forest. Almas learns that the village has sheltered many adults who fled from the oppressive rule of a harsh kingdom. The kingdom often weakens before curses, and they repeatedly bring famine. Taxes in the kingdom are rising, and if you don't pay, you will be executed immediately. In fact, they want to flee to Rosees, but crossing the border unnoticed turned out to be too difficult. Soon whispered rumors reached their ears about a forest village guarded by a griffin, where orphans lived happily. When the man stepped forward and with a pleading voice asked Almas for help, promising that they would take on any work, suddenly one of them approached Ruru. Someone grabbed her by the hand and asked if she was Ruru. She shouted loudly at that person not to touch her. Suddenly she felt, when left alone, it is already too late to pretend to be a mother, and the first to refuse to accept this was Ruru's biological mother. Other children also spoke out against it. They were afraid it would spoil their relationship with Soyeon, but Tetra did not believe these people. She sensed the treachery of the royal company and suggested checking everything as Almas had said. Everyone agreed. This time she would go to the company's kingdom to sort out everything she saw, and under Ron's instructions, watch over them while he was away. Almas found Rhea and told her directly that she needed a horse to go to the company together with Tetra, and Tetra asked in surprise if she really intended to ride, since she did not know how. Almas smiled and showed her a device resembling a pedal, assuring her that there would be no problems. It was attached on both sides under the horse's feet, so Rhea could ride without any equipment. Almas could not return to the world where he lived before the invention of the pedal. Not everyone can become a knight. It is very difficult to control a horse if the feet are not fixed, but with a saddle and a little practice, riding can be easy. Almas was silent. He did not want to get involved in a military campaign, and Tetra informed him about this. Roland Firma is still an ambitious king loved by many people. It seems they behave this way because they truly hate him. Earlier, before he became a good person, he was very close to the father and their entire family. They quickly found themselves in a village in a kingdom that, as it seemed to them, belonged to real soldiers. The villagers said bitterly to Almas that they left in the middle of the night, and that teenagers are taught to track those who fled because of the suffocating taxes he, as a merchant, imposed. Almas generously offered to simplify the conversation and asked if they intended to return those who fled. The tracks lead into the forest apparently. Those people rushed there, probably believing in Griffin's paradise. Finding them would not be difficult. The royal company had wizards and hunting dogs, and Almas kept asking whether Griffin was in the forest and whether their arrival would disturb him. The soldiers bitterly admitted that they knew, but the king would force them to do it anyway. He did not care whether it was sacred or someone was afraid, and one thing was clear: he would never forgive those who fled. When the army brought them back, those people were already dead. Almas and Tetra quickly gathered all the necessary information and rushed back to the village to plan how to respond. He sternly warned the other children: if they betray those people, they will definitely be killed. Almas said to 70 people in the village. The army believed they could easily destroy them, but now, with an additional 30 newcomers, they could number up to 100, enough to scare and stop the attack on the village. At that moment, everyone changed their minds and agreed to help because they finally understood they needed to unite. They shouted at the top of their lungs that handing them over was cruel, and he also partially agreed, because as soon as King Fermet finds the village, it will no longer be safe there. When the meeting, at which Almas was present, ended, he drew all attention to himself and announced that he would respect their desire to stay here. Everyone rejoiced and thanked loudly. Almas raised his hand, ordered silence, and continued, saying that it also depends on each person's behavior. Almas himself was thinking about how to tell them about the unwavering forces. Ron ran in panic and shouted loudly that the royal army was still in the forest, but undoubtedly heading here. Tetra sensed their approach with magic and understood that it was only a matter of time. Without wasting time, she threw to everyone who came: the army is coming to capture and kill them all. Fear swept through the village like a wave. No one could believe that, having fled so far, they found themselves in such danger. Earl broke away from the crowd, shouted for everyone to calm down, and stepped forward himself. He bowed low before Almas and apologized, admitting that they had brought trouble to the village. Almas, the village elder, replied that the matter was serious, but it was already too late to do anything, and passed this on to the king, hoping that he would not ignore their village. Earl spoke decisively and promised to defend this place, exactly what Almas hoped for. He added that although he had little experience in trade and negotiations, he hoped it would be useful. Almas smiled and asked him to help. They moved to a cozy corner to discuss their next plan. Almas whispered that this was their home, and when only moments remained, Earl poured into words everything he knew. Earl suggested first gathering and convincing everyone that negotiations were better than fighting, yet their first task became arming everyone. Unfortunately, doubts crept in. Would the attempt at peaceful resolution be perceived as a provocation, especially since the enemy leader was cunning and invincible, and Earl insisted that they must make them believe that the villagers could win. He began to lay out that the forest was an obstacle, so the enemy could not bring many people at once, and the king's detachment would be insufficient against the village's numbers. Neither ordinary people nor the regular army could act quickly, so most of those who could move were his personal guards, the best among his people, and he would not dare lose them here. Earl thought that at the meeting they only needed to agree on conditions and weigh all the pros and cons. For the royal guard this should go smoothly, and the main goal was simply to warn him not to bring the body. Earl took the ring off him. His belongings became a clear sign of ownership for every earl. He had a child to trade. He was to trade with King Fermi and his army, entering the dark depths of the forest. He was upset when he realized that running was really troublesome. It would be better if the peasants joined the rebellion, because it would be hard for him to catch those who fled. A colleague asked if he was really going to do it. He calmly replied, "Kill them all, of course, if he lets them go." People would be more willing to listen to their instructions. The problem was extremely important. Although some were cruel, there was no other way. They had to do it. Seeing the determined faces of his soldiers, he felt pride, and then asked him to say what he thinks about the fear of a warrior who is afraid to admit that he now understands the power of the king, and recalls that joy on the face when, killing Lagos, he gained independence and became a king for the people around him. The king's hatred for the family began to echo. Lagos was too submissive before Reseda, not because of inability, but because his command skills were brilliant. He wondered where that child came from and was mistaken in letting her escape. Others had already waved it off. The child is probably dead in this endless forest. She simply cannot survive. While they were talking, the guide suddenly stopped and exclaimed that they had found his place. No one suspected that a village would be found here. The forest king, stunned, asked again, "Is this the very village they whisper about, as if it is protected by a griffin?" It all started with fear of the impossibility of war. Oh God, the king trembled with horror, fearing that his people would stop inventing stories that. He said he had never gotten lost in the forest and once met Griffin, who told him that he lived deep in the forest and could do what he did. Cheerfully moving forward, the people soon came across a village. Looking at the houses and fields, they estimated that about 100 people lived here. Around rise watchtowers and barricades like formidable guards to keep the wolves out. Now the peasants are armed and ready, just as Earl predicted. The king shouted to his soldiers, "Do nothing I would not do myself." He did not want to lose any of them. Alma stepped forward and, with her head held high, introduced herself as the village elder. The king coldly said he came only to punish those who fled the country, and Alma firmly replied that the peasants would not allow him to kill anyone and that she could not carry out his orders. The king, filled with curiosity, waved his hand and called Alma to step forward and speak. He did not even expect Alma to come, and frankly admired her courage, while she nervously hoped everything would go according to plan, and as everyone wished that everyone would remain calm and do nothing unnecessary. Alma approached and, a little nervous, said it was a great honor to meet the king and humbly asked to come closer. The king replied, "No need." He knew Alma did not feel safe. He passionately wanted to understand why Alma refused to accept his request, and Alma herself believed this was at least a chance for the king to hear his words. The village was tiny, but if the king wanted to destroy them, would anyone be able to spare them? The king did not think so. Fugitives should be punished gently and carefully. He asked if the king could punish them but spare their lives, and handed him a ring, the same one the count gave as proof of the commoner's death. The king paused for a moment, then coldly ordered Alma to hand over all the rings and everything he had in the village. Of course, he will spare everyone and make sure that everyone has clothes. Alma's thought to himself that everything Earl said was true. Calmly, Alma's told the king that if he takes everything, everyone will perish, so he should at least soften a bit, and then his tone became stricter. And he said if the king wants to take everything, he ordered the village to be burned down. The king believed him. Alma's village turned out to be too fragile to withstand that battle. But he agreed to take only 70% for Alma's. This seemed like a large percentage, and it was enough for him to agree. The agreement was concluded, and Alma's sighed with relief because the battle did not happen. Tetra asked what to do next, and Alma's already had a plan. First, meet with King Roses to discuss the refugees and necessary actions. Earl was tormented by doubt whether Alma's was acquainted with King Roses. He asked to take him along, but Alma's decided it was better to discuss it alone, apologized and explained that when exactly he plans to go he does not decide, so he cannot say whether Earl can go with him. Tetra, hesitating, stopped him. She gathered courage and said that she would also go with Alma's. She did not believe him, asked him to say it again. Tetra, with pain in her voice, told him that she had thought about it the whole way and told Alma's a lot. He always runs away because he does not want to cause destruction. But the refugees are now suffering. The king is strict, and as the heir of the royal line, he considers it his duty to closely watch Tetra. And sadly told about her lonely life. Tetra loudly and decisively says, if she does not want to do something, no one will force her. She is tired of living in fear of the king now. She longs for her own Tetra life. She cannot get rid of the thought, will Alma's marry her as soon as he resolves this matter? Alma's suddenly sharply stops the horse, says with surprise in his voice that it is important to him, but in a completely different way, and everyone, even Ron, sees it. He asks her to get off and talk calmly. Family, he always considered Tetra a sister, just like Ron and Soyen, and everyone in their village he simply regarded as friends. After a pause, Alma's decisively said that, as a man, he cannot accept Tetra's proposal. He so wants the one who spoke those words to become her husband. Tetra shines with joy when Alma says that they agreed to marry, and it must be done quickly. They need to meet with the King of Roses. He remembers that now everyone is in danger. Alma's, with pain in his voice, tells about all the difficulties that befell the village. They lost a lot of food and supplies, and King Rossi's understood everything and promises, instead, to provide them with food for a year. At the harsh border, protecting refugees a usual matter. He was glad that the village was not set on fire, because you cannot take taxes from the dead. And then the king noticed the girl next to Alma's and asked her if she had seen him recently. Embarrassed, the girl barely audibly said that 10 years had passed since the king visited their home and met with her and her father. The king's face became stern. He warned her that if she lied, she would be punished. He asked for Tetra's surname and, covering his face, exclaimed that God had not abandoned him. Then he demanded proof, saying she had a family mark on her body and whether he could see it. Apologizing for his insistence, the king insisted on confirmation. After she showed the mark, Tetra took out a thin ring and said it resembled the rings of refugees who came to her village. The king, impressed, asked where she had hidden it so securely. Tetra explained that the ring was gold, and it was dangerous to always wear gold, especially when everyone needed money, so she hid it under a large tree where no one would notice, and added that if there was no other way, she would consider selling it. Alma's burst out laughing, and warmly assured that he did not accuse her, and was not angry at all. The impatient king sharply demanded to stop the private conversation, and insisted that the ring be brought to him for inspection, while experts checked Tetra's item. Then Alma's continued the meeting with the king and Raymond regarding the issue of centralization. which he himself had raised. The king answered decisively. He took a course toward centralization to concentrate national power in the central government, creating the highest centralized authority that would command the army and collect taxes for the current country of King Rasasi, divided into many small regions. To concentrate power in his hands, the king needed their unity, but even if he summoned that family, it would not necessarily side with him, so it was important to gradually reduce the political influence of this powerful family. The king asked Almaz what it meant to apply the force of the entire army. Almaz said, when the people gain more political power, the grip of the royal family noticeably weakens. The king fears that his power will weaken. Almaz acknowledges this, but says it does not matter. The main thing is that the king guarantees the rights of the people and becomes their protector against the powerful clan. Raymond understands how power and the state work, but warns that if what Almaz proposes happens, the dynamics will change. The powerful clan will be against both the royal family and the people. Unfortunately, Almaz agrees and adds that with such changes, if the clan wants more political weight, will have to oppose both forces and the monarchy will fulfill its mission, and the king asks whether his people will do the same to strengthen their political influence. Almaz allows for this, but leans more toward the idea that the chance of conflict between these two forces is much higher. Their influence usually comes from the League of Cities of Kesha, a republic without a king, while the Edians, loyal to the monarchy, imagine the republic quite differently, and this new republic is truly intriguing. Almaz was convinced that many people in Adelia were interested in the ideas of the Republican Party. The king simply waved it off and called it Almaz's prediction, and Raymond disagreed with the king's notes that the influence was explained smoothly. Their biggest problem is the company's rebellion. The king shows that they, as Almaz desires, have already created a certain form of centralized power, but resistance to this still exists. After Almaz's speech, Raymond's attitude softened a bit. He exclaimed that he would take him as his son, but immediately shock overwhelmed him, and he asked his brother what he had just done. He fell silent for a moment while Almaz left the room, and when the door closed, Raymond directly stated that he wanted to see Almaz on the throne. Although Almaz is not the first choice, as the second he is by no means the king's enemy, I reject the idea that Almaz, though a genius, is just an ordinary person and only 16 years old. Raymond, a year older, immediately asks him, why not make the younger brother the next king? The first candidate was Raymond himself, but he has no children, and if this child is not yours, and that man will do even worse to her, then the words of Raymond's fiancée, who protested against choosing a commoner, are more important than the crown for that man. The king is a true madman who endlessly chases money, alcohol, and women, and he asks his brother if he understands that handing the country over to foreign hands could split it. Raymond does not accept victory's persistence for him. The destruction of the Diable family is already enough. He again does not believe. Does his brother really want to marry him to the daughter of the man who killed the king's 2 wives? The king actually does not want this, but if their marriage goes well, Debal, Rizishi, and the whole family quietly work together to subtly implement Raymond's plan of centralization, and they begin to doubt whether her brother really believes in this man. The king agrees that being too meticulous is not always good, but he is torn by curiosity. Why did his brother involve another young man in his plan? Raymond begins to study Almaz, the second son of Griffin, who radiates a divine aura and has traits useful in politics. Although this young man could be useful, Raymond finds no peace. He is terribly worried about how to keep the family together. Raymond says that it seems to him, preserving unity is simply impossible. But Almaz and Tetra offer another way to implement their old plan to form an alliance with the Ash family. They even seriously talk about marriage, and this fits perfectly into Raymond's plan. Even when the Ash house lost political power, everyone who married into their family immediately became the king's adopted child. As Griffin's son, Almaz was the perfect candidate for this role. The king agreed to the plan, and Almaz became his adopted son. But the king still needed some time to consider the throne. Almaz was called back and told that he was now a boy in the wardrobe. Returning to the village from the royal palace, Almaz heard Ruru's loud screams break the silence and immediately rushed to find out what had happened. Ron complains that 2 of Ruru's relatives constantly try to approach her. Everyone gathers to decide what to do, but those people stubbornly do not listen. Almaz thundered in response, can't they just leave the girl alone? He scolds them and wonders, don't they see how Ruru is trembling and tense right in front of them? They could not forgive her, even though she herself had already decided to forgive them. It was not their fault. They decided to pressure Almaz so that he would finally decide. If this continues, they will be driven out of the nearest village. He became curious how would Almaz handle this. Almaz explained simply, the more people in the village, the more necessary rules and a clear goal. But if he punishes them and the Earl takes care of it, it might cause dissatisfaction. All this could have been resolved without any misunderstandings if Almaz had consulted Bartolo. Bartolo suggested digging a canal around the forest. If the king with a strong army wants to break in, he will have to cross it, and so they could protect the village in case of an attack. Almaz asked with interest how Bartolo was doing now. His military rank is Bolton, and he calmly replied that he has been leading troops against King Fermi for a year. Almaz laughed, thinking that Bartolo only knows how to drink, but Bartolo explained that he does not drink much, although he always carries alcohol with him. Although he was a former army commander who never crossed the border, he was still known. Almaz jokingly said that this does not remove the label of a drunkard from him, and Bartolo suggested taking wooden swords and fighting together. Almaz immediately agreed, considering it only a rehearsal before the decisive clash with Fermi. Surprisingly, Bartolo easily repelled Almaz's attack with one blow, and stunned, exclaimed, not believing that someone could be truly that strong. Almaz apologized for not showing all his strength, and Bartolo recalled how Uriah said that Almaz has many special abilities. Almaz pushes him to realization. He saw that strength and remains calm, so in a real fight it will be difficult for Almaz to defeat him without relying on his own power. When a group conversation approaches, he honestly says that he does not want to meet Almaz anymore. Almaz asks to join his squads and fight side by side with him, and one day Yuri comes to look at Ron and others who are training hard, and tells Almaz that his blessing can now strengthen the power of those who are loyal to him. But this is a completely different blessing. It gives men physical strength and women voodoo. Everyone already knows that Yuri will marry Rigard, and the king asks Raymond not to raise unnecessary talks. Raymond is broken. He thinks about their poverty and believes that any girl would suffer if forced to marry a man who killed his wife. He insists that if the brother truly prays for the sister's happiness, he must allow her to be with the one she loves, but the king gives him no other choice. In his free time, Almaz again gets to work and crafts various things, all for the military needs of Tetra, who came from beyond the village limits, and Tetra asks Almaz what he is working on. I decided that it was okay to tell him that he was making black powder. Black powder first appeared in China, and it is the oldest form of gunpowder. Unfortunately, at first he refused to bring military technologies into this world, but the king's stubbornness forced him to agree only Tetri needed to be explained. It turned out that it was made from charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. After explaining everything, Almaz carefully led Tetri away from his research area. It was not ready yet, and he could not guarantee her safety. When they moved away, the black powder exploded. Almaz warned Tetri that even a tiny amount in the appropriate container could cause a loud explosion and lead to injuries or death. If this is unavoidable, cases like a tooth explosion can easily happen. Then add a few pieces of ceramic or metal fragments to complete it. A month later, Almaz showed his invention to Bartolo, who reported that he was forging tactics to defeat King Firm. Almaz, with a firm voice, asked if he knew about those failed tactics with shields and spears against the enemy. On the left, shields were placed for cover because the right flank was weak, so skilled warriors needed to be placed there. Bolton admitted that they usually backed each other up, but in the end, the outcome of the battle depended on luck. Then Almaz suggested, what if the cavalry attacked both of Bolton's wings? And Bartolo recognized Almaz's ingenuity as brilliant, but added that not everyone can become a knight overnight. Almaz recalled that he came not to talk about the battle, but to show black powder, and when the explosion thundered right before their eyes, Bartholomew was confused and asked how Almaz did it. His inventions always made the heart leap. Bartholomew inquired if it could be repeated. Almaz assured that the discovery allows doing even more and that they will definitely win the battle, but warned not to get complacent. Such a thing can happen anytime, to which Bartholomew smiled and implied that Almaz was too confident. Almaz and the peasants tirelessly prepared day and night for the battle that was coming in 2 years. The king of the company quickly passed by upon hearing that another clan had switched to the Ash family side. 2 years had passed since Tetri was found. The Ash family began to recover. The growth of the rebels worried him, but he felt as if luck smiled on him when he learned about the fall of the Rose's kingdom. He decided that the king had been ill for a long time and instantly felt this was their chance. Without a leader, the squad could easily capture Roses. Nearby, a soldier was worried due to lack of complete information, but the king angrily asked what he meant, insisting that they had long been preparing for this war. In 3 days, they planned to attack and rob Roses, using a shortcut through the forest to catch the enemy by surprise. The soldier fearfully asked if this would anger Griffin, but the king waved it off, saying Yadder had already safely passed through that forest before. The most difficult thing, he said, was to find that secret path through the forest, which was revealed thanks to the deserters. People still doubted, but the king believed that the village was protected by the Griffin. Griffin, the king demanded explanations sternly why the Griffin did not appear when last time they took almost all their food. If the villagers do not surrender, they will simply be destroyed, and the king believes that no matter what happens, they will obey his order. The witch sent a bird spirit to spy in the forest. And when it was already about to return, the witch was attacked. Frightened, she asked herself why they were afraid now perhaps it had suffered a divine attack, and this happened only after the third bird message. Suddenly the witch felt something strange. Eagles should not fly in flocks. Their constant appearances screamed of voodoo magic. It is hard to believe that in such a small village there are immediately 3 voodoo witches hiding, but they must leave immediately. When Grem and Ruru successfully caught the bird that served for observation, Ruru was gripped by fear she could kill them, and thus anger firm, and Almaz replied that since the company sent their spies, they had already become known enemies. In the royal palace, the count fervently begged for immediate help. Just as the earl returned with the news that reinforcements would arrive in 3 days, the company's troops had already set out. They heard about the fall of Rosie. Forces from neighboring countries and several clans stirred around. The earl read Raymond's letter to his son. The enemy wanted to divide and plunge the capital into chaos, so Raymond asked Almaz to hold the army for 3 days. King Firm responded to the request and summoned 3,200 soldiers under his banners. 200 would go to the village if possible. They would rush to the capital, or at least distract the enemy's attention, and the king himself decided to personally lead 3,000 in a frontal assault on the capital. Anxiety prevailed in the capital. The army anxiously thought that the mobilization of 32,000 warriors would exhaust all forces, while the enemy could gather up to 15,000. The king asked if he should worry, but he confidently replied that he would not lie, and then the king revealed a strange thing. He made a deal with Regardable to avoid war in exchange for the crown. So it turns out, the second largest force in Modal will not get involved in the fight. The king is tormented by doubt whether Rieger will betray them. Maybe he only wants to gain the trust and gratitude of the people of Rhesus, but the king believes that dealing with Rieger will not be difficult, especially since he is trying to sign an alliance with 2 neighboring countries. According to sources, they have already moved troops to the border and are waiting for the agreement, so the king is forced to divide his troops to protect against surprises. Their decisive refusal to participate and the expulsion of troops make him grimly assume that there are probably only 4,000 people left in the capital. When the people heard the news, they stood up and shouted, "If this is true, the difference is only 1,000 soldiers. The king will definitely win," and everyone is already excitedly discussing how a toast for victory will be prepared in the Rose Palace. Immediately after this, Almaz saw 200 soldiers set out from the watchtower towards the village, just as had been reported earlier. The villagers were bustling and did not know what to do next. Someone suggested that Ruru transform into an eagle and attack them, but Almaz stopped the panic, calmed everyone, and reminded them that they were protected by the fortress and emotions, so he advised to stay calm and stick to the plan. Almaz suddenly realized that among those approaching, there was not a single royal retinue member. The leader could turn out to be just an ordinary commander. The leader demanded that Almaz open the gates and give up all their food. When Almaz refused, the enemy forces immediately launched an attack. Part of the enemy was indeed lured into a trap set by the village, but the rest slipped through. Then an endless hail of arrows prevented the villagers from effectively counterattacking. Graham's position was discovered, and he was continuously attacked. They threw stones at the enemy's shield, but the shield deflected the blows and saved them from danger, so the villagers found themselves in trouble. Many were wounded, and Almaz ordered the wounded to be taken to a safe place. Ron relentlessly threw stones at them, and Soyen realized that the attack on the village was futile. The enemy freely released arrows. It had already been 2 days since King Roses fell ill. Chaos reigned in the castle and there was no good news, and Soyen, having read Raymond's letter in anger, cursed him as an unfortunate loser who sent no soldiers and hid his troops in his native lands. Raymond suddenly felt that he could use this opportunity for his political benefit, and then realized another thing: this was a chance for them too. If they carried this out without his support, his position would definitely be shaken. Suddenly a soldier ran in with news from Almaz. Almaz turned the tide of events. Not only did he defeat the royal army that took the short path through the forest, but also captured the enemy general. No one in the village died, although there were wounded among the enemy. Total losses amounted to 180 people. The news stunned Raymond. He asked the soldier to repeat it again and again. Sometimes he only hoped that his son would believe it, but he never imagined such success. Almaz was called to report on the situation, and Raymond told his son that now they had only 3,000 soldiers, almost as many as the enemy. No matter how steadfast he seemed, he was a military genius. If the troops were equal, they might not have won. Almaz decided that this company would not engage in battle unless confident of victory. By the command of the commander, Raymond resolutely decided to appoint his son to defeat King Fermi. 2 years had already passed. He took Almaz with him, the one who had learned a lot about military tactics. Raymond announced that he would appoint Bartholomew and Burroughs as commanders so that they would accompany Almaz and make decisions together on the battlefield. He did not want his inexperienced son to decide everything alone, so he laughed and added that he was not foolish enough to let his young son make decisions that would affect the country. Almaz received news. Several friends from his village also wanted him to join Raymond's smiles. He said that security for Almaz was not a problem, and Raymond would stay here and give orders from here. There, Almaz instantly prepared himself and his troops to depart. Raymond ordered his son not to die there on the way to him. The son was riding next to Almaz. Almaz constantly asked if his feet were cold, and Almaz seriously told him to stop joking. He was really worried, persuaded Almaz to let him take command and ordered him to relax and rest. Almaz threw his legs over the horse's saddle, and Bartella whispered to Almaz that all the soldiers were worried, not just him, and they wondered why Griffin's son was still young and not strong. Then Almaz's troops and his detachment went each their own way, and Almaz told Bartholomew that maybe he would no longer be able to command, but he could still fight, so he wanted to be in the front row. Bartolo scolded him, reminding him of Raymond's words, "Do not expose your son to danger," and Alma replied that he understood his father's temper, but this time he asked for permission. After some thought, Bartolo agreed. He decided that Almaz had enough strength to defeat the enemy and capture Tetra with one short spear stroke and a successful approach. Almaz's hand urged him not to do foolish things. Soyon stepped forward and, with a trembling voice, reported that he had seen the enemy. They were still an hour away from Bartholomew. Praise him, confirm that he is truly a skilled wizard, and Almaz is now becoming great, having become Raymond's adopted son. Next to him stand a mighty wizard and a brave warrior. Their gazes seem to ask not to consider this a natural gift. They look to the sky and emphasize how hard their work and training have been, and Bartholomew says that today's battle is inevitable and gently asks everyone to take care of their own safety, because the company's forces are already approaching. Almaz looked at their advanced equipment with obvious surprise. Bartolo calmly explained that in their company, it is customary to keep warriors in constant tension between the threat of battle and hunger. Almaz worries that this method might work, but it is difficult to implement. Tetra notes that both sides have cavalry, but the enemy has much more, especially compared to the attack on the village. Almaz convinced everyone to agree that the previous attack on the village brought them new warriors who now pressure him and force him to give combat orders. Almaz shouted at the top of his lungs for everyone to line up as agreed. Tetra is confused and asks what plan is being referred to, and Almaz calmly says there is no plan, he just shouted to play the role of commander, and Bartolo laughs, thinking that Almaz knows the plan he himself made 2 years ago. He insists that everyone show what they have achieved in these 2 years of training. The enemy impressively quickly masters the formation. Almaz, the king of the company, felt a troubling knot in his chest when he saw the concentration of forces on the right flank. It seemed Rosewood was going to directly attack his elite units on that wing. He laughed and looked with interest at his strategy. They say if this is all they have, then against a trickster like him, it is unlikely that new tactics will succeed. The right flank is simply weaker than the others. It seems vulnerable from the outside, but breaking through there is not easy, and they, in a quiet, confident whisper, say that this time they will definitely win. Battle between the armies officially begins. Rhea leads the assault, and the cavalry, despising her as just a girl, laughs. One mockingly asks if she wants to be beaten, and another steps forward to confront Rhea and stop her onslaught. Behind her marches her faithful Rosewood, warning Rhea, be careful. He decisively tells her, step back and give the front line to her. Soon the enemies realized, Rosewood is incredibly powerful. One of them even shouted that it was true. She is too strong and they would not withstand Rhea and Rosewood. Almaz stood aside and tirelessly praised their efforts, noting that at this level everything was going smoothly. They easily controlled the enemy cavalry, and those loyal to Rosewood, loyal to Almaz, became physically even stronger. Almaz is confident. Only the two of them can hold the situation on the left flank. A soldier runs in and shouts that enemy infantry is approaching, and Almaz orders to use explosive spears filled with black powder and magical paper to deliver a powerful strike. After they were used to defend the village, only 10 remained. Let this be the first secret weapon used, and although there are few of them, they definitely sowed confusion among King Firm's enemies. King Firm looked confusedly at the endless explosions and soldiers jumping into the air, and could not understand what kind of weapon Almaz possessed. The opposite side only built guesses, which, unfortunately, held only thanks to the strong frontline fighters. The First Order hold the front. No one really understood these strange events, but everyone was sure that their formation was not so easy to break. The offensive company, set on victory, ordered to divide forces to surround Almaz's troops from both sides. Almaz believed that with the encirclement, they would defeat Almaz's army regardless of the strength of his left wing, and then he finally realized what a terrible situation it was. He grimly, decisively declares that he will not allow them to surround and take his shield, steps towards them, and again, insists that he will not allow it. The company immediately sees in him a true leader, Almaz, and the peasants together shout that he is truly the son of Griffin and adopted by Raymond, the protector of Tetra and his fiancée. Almaz continues to roar at the top of his voice. He, too, is the supreme commander of the army. Knowing that this would attract the enemy's attention, King Fermi ordered his men to kill Almaz, confidently believing that this way they would achieve victory, and Almaz loudly shouted that no one would dare approach him because he has the power granted by the emperor, and he is not so easy to defeat. This successfully distracts the enemy's attention, and Rhea with Rosewood quietly deal with their cavalry. When the squad realized this, it was already too late. Almaz directly intervened in the clash and pushed for battle, and the unexpected strike successfully stopped Firm's attack. Firm saw what a horror it was, but said that if at that moment Almaz could not fight on the battlefield, it would not matter. Almaz aggressively rushed at Firm and, challenging, asked, did Almaz really think that victory could only be achieved by this power? Almaz said that if he struck with full force, the spear would break, so he held back. If it was Bartolo's strike, the company would scatter. He realized that against such a powerful spear, a different tactic was needed, and when he changed the spear, the shield proved useless. The company's movements were still readable like open cards. Almaz decided to stay on the defense and wait for an opportunity to attack, but the company caught Almaz off guard again. They admitted that they had long been watching Almaz's fighting style and noticed. His skills were not perfect, but one strong point distinguished him. The king sincerely said that Almaz had no chance of victory. Almaz acknowledged the situation described by the company, but a thought flashed through his mind that could have turned the course of that powerful attack. And they asked why Almaz froze during that battle. A sudden attack struck unexpectedly and forced Almaz to give all his strength. With one powerful blow, he shattered their spear and decisively told Almaz to find a new weapon. Almaz asked if they were really sure and warned that the company might regret it if they had to fight one-on-one. Fermi did not just want to win the victory, they wanted had to be fair. Encouraging his soldiers, Almaz gracefully threw his sword from afar. He decided not to use it. He realized that his company had a clear advantage in battle thanks to his excellent techniques and sharp eye with the spear, but Almaz was confident that the company did not suspect his skill with the sword. This could be his chance to turn the tide of the battle, to challenge the royal retinue, and force them to notice the obvious difference in length between the sword and the sturdy spear. Almaz tried to keep his distance, but the spear instantly closed the gap between them, rushing at incredible speed. Almaz explained amicably that he was using kendo steps, a footwork technique that is hard to perform on the ground. Although he firmly said it was impossible to understand, Fermi's company still tried to create distance, covering themselves with shields. Almaz knew that in command and strategy he might not shine, but his strength was enough to prevent the company from throwing all its might, breaking through his defense, and easily defeating Fermi, even before the dying company informed Almaz that he had to take responsibility for his murder. He dreamed of uniting half the island and fervently begged Almaz to continue his work. The company wanted Almaz to become a great king, remembered in history, and for the first to fall by Almaz's hand to be himself. Finally, he asked Almaz to take care of the happiness of the only person he ever had. The farewell company still managed to say a lot of words before death, but if Almaz wanted to remain in history, he would have acknowledged him as a genius, a man next to whom even Griffin was afraid to be, and the people immediately began to celebrate the commander's victory over King Firm. Almaz shouted to return everyone to the whirlpool of battle raging on the field, and Ron tightly gripped his sword and declared that the enemy leader was defeated. The news reported the destruction of the enemy's right flank and showed where they fled. Bartolo laughed and praised Almaz's genius. The young captain ordered his men to clear the battlefield, and the defeated troops were annihilated. The last soldiers of the enemy kingdom threw all their forces into battle, leaving the helpless capital, and Almaz's troops entered the capital without resistance and captured the royal castle farm without shedding a single drop of blood. After the incident, Bartolo was still basking in euphoria. He praised the incredible moves and strikes, even uncorked a bottle of wine in honor of their victory. Everyone sighed with relief and felt safe, and then Bartolo jokingly told how quickly he did it, taking wine from his original castle, which belonged to Lagos and was considered the result of reconquest, and today added that they fulfilled Lagos's last wish. Almaz froze, not taking his eyes off his native land, while meanwhile the peasants were walking closer. He rushed into Tetra's arms, sighing with relief wherever Almaz went. No one from their village died, and the people joyfully chanted. Ruru felt as if the whole country exploded with a celebration in honor of the happiness of its people. Almaz insisted in a letter to Tetra that he consider the people's opinion. No one expected that the one who brought victory to the homeland would bring the enemy's head. Bartholomew shouted into the crowd, asking if Almaz gave more than they hoped. Next, it was necessary to decide what to do with the territory, and everything depended on who would become the next leader, so as not to let the seeds of rebellion, desired by the people, grow. Almas inherited the company's lands, which originally belonged to the Lagos Ash family. Only a month later, the company's inhabitants came under the rule of the Roses Empire, and King Roses recovered without complications. Everything went smoothly, and finally the day of Almes and Tetra's wedding arrived. The ceremony was blessed by all, and at the end, sincere, warm blessings flew from different families. The soldier brought a gift and announced that one family could not come. Almas instantly recognized in it the gift of the Dable family. They really were not at the wedding. The Dables openly opposed the annexation of the company's territory, but this gift for Almas and Tetra clearly showed. Although they protested against the unpleasant annexation, they had no objections to the wedding itself. After that, people whispered about what position the Dibble family would take. Tetra reviewed all the gifts requested for Almas and wondered if she wanted to join the celebration. Almas smiled and declined. He preferred to sit here next to her and watch the people below. He thoughtfully pictured in his mind their path from the Romalia forest, and his heart filled with gratitude to everyone for their contribution to their success. King Rose became angry and sharply scolded his brother Raymond for what he had done during his unconsciousness, and Raymond defended himself, insisting that he had taken on the burden of ruling while the king was absent. Although the king showed displeasure, he acknowledged that Almas had become a hero and believed that the Ash family would be stable if Almas led it. He decisively ordered Raymond to convey, their wedding must be prepared in another place. Seimei, filled with happiness, arrived at the bustling trading city of Claris. The gatekeeper smiled and said calmly, "Entry to the city is free, only merchants pay, but if Seimei plans to stay more than a month, he will have to pay taxes." The friendly gatekeeper warned Seimei about two types of people in the city, simply explained who pays taxes and whom it is better not to listen to and beware of. At the city entrance, Seimei accidentally helped a girl named Ismia, who was wildly passionate about architecture. Together they caught a thief. A relationship developed between them. They found a restaurant to talk, and he told about his dream to reach the edge of the ocean and fulfill his parents' dream, and their goal was not far from the trading city. Isma asked to join Seimei and explained, the city was also full of architects. She, as a woman, saw no opportunity there. She wanted to show her talent in a backward corner that resembled their destination, and believed that when King Rose Seish fell unconscious, she would have more chances to prove herself. Raymond convened a council to decide the fate of the family territory's ashes, proposed to transfer power to Almas's son, and everyone agreed that entrusting this to Almas was a wise decision. Outraged and furious, he accused Raymond of abusing power and could not understand how he gave such important land to a person of unknown origin. Raymond calmly explained that Almas was defeated by his adopted son, the very one who firmly stood on the battlefield, unlike the cowardly Rhaegar, who withdrew the troops to his territory and only watched others fight. Rhaegar sharply asked who Almas was before adoption and directly called him an orphan. Raymond replied, surprised, asking how Almas could be a father if he was Griffin's son, and firmly assured that everything would be fine with him. He would receive support from the military advisor and the council. The role of the peace advisor turned out to be decisive, and all because of the recent battles of Alia. Raymond called for a vote. This threw Rhaegar off balance, and he quietly in his heart whispered a curse. Raymond wielded influence over everyone's opinions only because he was the king's brother and sat next to him. He calmed Rhaegar and asked him to believe. The king had only 2 years left, and when he died, Raymond would lose both influence and the throne. Most likely the throne would go to Rhaegar, especially since he was engaged to Uriah. Rhaegar then asked if he would support him, to which he replied that he had devoted his entire life to serving the Diable family, the strongest among the clans. He would probably support the new king, but warned Rhaegar about Almas. He did not consider it a true victory, just luck. He was sure he could do the same himself, and swore to destroy Almas, warning Rhaegar to do so only as a last resort. Even with the brother, the King of Roses, any conversation had to be conducted carefully. The king did not hide his surprise at Raymond's harsh decision, and a tense scene unfolded. Raymond asked his brother to allow the marriage of Almas and Uriah as soon as possible, because the king feared that if Rhaegar became the next monarch, a civil war would erupt between Rose's Ash and the Dibble clan. Almas had a lower status, and the king believed that at least this way bloodshed could be avoided. Raymond was broken and mourned for his niece Uriah, who would have to marry a man who killed his own wife. After long persuasion, the king agreed to his brother's decision, but on one condition. Almas must sincerely respect and strive to be king and be ready to have blood on his hands from a civil war for the sake of the Almas village community. They were preparing to move to the Ash region, despite how many people were already there, and the new refugees decided to stay in Earl village, and he said, "It is a lie that I do not remember. Dear, I will remember and spend the rest of my life paying for Almas's kindness." He said it would be so, was glad she was nearby, but then, all the lush forests of this land should become their territory, so the count decided to stay in the village and take care of Almas himself, looking after those silent people. He said with surprise that all the refugees had decided so, and as it seemed to him, everything remained the same. They will return. Their native Tetra was not surprised for her. It was only confirmation that living in the village of Almas was more comfortable than in any other country. Almas smiled and said that this is not only his duty but everyone's business. He was the first to ask what to do in his position, and Burroughs, after consulting with the advisor, took a stance and explained without formality that the important thing is to maintain order, protect the territory, and prevent voodoo magic. He added that Almas would also have to sort out all those collections and taxes they have to pay to King Rose. Almas muttered secretly that there was too much work. But Bartolo calmed him down. This job can be handled. He even gave examples of fair assessments that take culture into account. Almas will not be alone. Burroughs and Bartolo will stand nearby. Bartolo promises to watch over peace and order. Burroughs will take on legal issues and decisions, and Almas himself will eventually be able, if he wishes, to change who is responsible for what. Bartolo told Almas that his next task is to revive the kingdom under his young rule, and although Almas admitted that it would be difficult, he understood. He must fulfill his duty. Money was needed for everything, and raising taxes seemed the only way out, but he interrupted and asked if there had ever been a real taxation system in the country at all. Because he suspected that tax experts probably manipulated incomes or at least influenced personal wealth. So half the country decided that the first step should be a population census to accurately determine the size of taxes and minimize losses. Almas made a paper questionnaire to survey the population. They had to record the most important age, gender, and property status of each person in the district. Moving further, they noticed that there were almost no trained people in the country, only Tetra and fewer than 10 others. Almas realized that due to illiteracy, no one had conducted a census before, so tax collection turned into a big problem. Almas ordered them to use a simple form to write down only those numbers that people consider even. For those who could not read or write, this was extremely simple. Tetra asked if they would have to do all this manually since it would be colossal work, but Almas smiled and replied that they would not do it that way. Instead, they would print from wooden clichés, like giant stamps. Just carve the signs on wooden blocks, apply paint, and press onto paper. Ron and Rosewood both agreed the method really works, but the problem is with taxes. The company considers the Ash region a remote zone, and Almas is sure that they can only take a low tax. They decided to take 10 of the harvest as a tax on land and labor, canceled the personal income tax. Burroughs stood nearby and exclaimed that introducing personal taxes is a bold step, because although they provide the state with stable income, they burden the citizens. We could forcibly collect huge land taxes from the owners, but nothing good will come from force. He wants the focus to be on citizens ready to take risks and reap the rewards. Bartholomew agreed to revive the land, but sternly reminded him, reviving the nation also requires money. Almas plans to massively distribute his tools, even rice threshers, but because of this many farmers may be left without work. Although he will give them subsidies, he will simultaneously increase profits from industrial paper production, which will also create more jobs. Regrettably, the development of other sectors had to be postponed, including the transition to crop rotation for rice. But as soon as he mentioned alcohol, Almas's eyes immediately lit up. He was the first to try the drink from Almas. He smiled and explained that making alcohol requires a lot of special equipment, and they currently have only one device, so they will have to find a skilled blacksmith to make more. The blacksmiths here are masters with iron, but a few know how to work with copper. Almas smiled broadly and said that copper would do. He paused and added that it remains to find buyers and investors, but he has a solution. Financial problems can be set aside. He intends to lower taxes, for which everyone laughed in surprise. Almas announced that now that all issues are resolved, they move on to military matters, and started the last topic of the day: military. He honestly admitted that he knows little about this matter. He is only a nominal commander. He called Bartholo, consulted him, and jokingly added that he had a little drink. It's time to get to work, and Bartholo laughed, promising to present it. For the first time since Almas became the leader of the country, a heavy responsibility and a calling to protect the land and people awakened in him, to drive criminals out of their territories and not let external invaders in, and people finally began to understand. Strong, though smaller in size, army is needed than what they had in their village. They need weapons, but first of all soldiers. Ron asked what they would do about that, and Almas insisted. First, we need to assess what we are getting into. There is no regular army here. Among the people there are almost no real fighters left. In the village only a few dozen know how to fight, and the sharpest threat is the neighboring kingdom of Demorger. King Roses expects Ash to become a shield against Vil, to become Morsar, so Almas inquired about the current military strength of the kingdom. Bartholomew thought a little and said that they have about 50,000 soldiers, but due to stretched holdings and numerous enemies, you cannot throw all the force at once. Only about 1,020,000 will go into battle. Tetra noted that in the battle with Firm they had no problem fielding 3,000 soldiers, and Bartolo said that people can still be recruited in the future, so the forces might be enough, especially if the general declares mobilization in case of war. Bartolo reassured, "Don't worry, the local army is usually well trained during war," but he says, if war breaks out suddenly, that's a completely different matter. In his opinion, it's better to have a standing army, which King Firm does not have, and about 300 soldiers is a waste. He asked what Almas thinks about those soldiers who, after the death of their king, found themselves without work and without a path. Almas said he must become a target of revenge for them. He killed their king, and if he is ignored, it could stir up a rebellion. Several sensible people decided to turn the feudal advice into a weapon, but he wants to first gather more money before continuing the discussion, so he orders everyone to replenish the gunpowder supplies. It is hard to make, and it will be too late to start making it only when it is needed. Almas insists on firmly fortifying everything possible finances, and the magic circle, Tetra, hearing this, says she will take on the necessary circle and soon begin preparing everything. And after a few days, Almas with 3 companions sets off to the bustling trading city of Claris, where it is much livelier than in Roses. Their first goal is to find a protector for wine and paper products. The second is to secure funds for the country's reconstruction, and Ron asks confusedly whether earning money and receiving it are not the same thing, but he is told that the profit from selling paper and distilling wine will not be enough, so they plan to borrow a large sum that Grem has, which raises concerns about the strategy itself. Almas convinces him they have money they can pay and even more capital to enter a bigger business. Grem wonders why not borrow from the King of Roses then, and Almas explains that the Kingdom of Roses has not yet recovered from economic problems and few can afford luxuries like paper or wine. Almas persuaded them not to worry about negotiations. The King of Roses has already introduced them to a merchant in Claris, so now they just have to agree with him as long as he does not try to take advantage of them. As soon as they approached the merchant, they immediately got to work and asked to see what he was selling. Almas took out fine paper and explained in simple words that it is very convenient for recording practical information as an alternative to papyrus or parchment. Aints became interested and asked if it could be written on, and Almas smiled and handed over all the paper samples so he could use them. He sees that compared to papyrus it can be sold for twice the price, but to quickly recoup the invested money, he cannot get rid of the thought, will Almas be able to increase production and sell at the same price as papyrus? Almas clearly sees it will cover only part of the market, but a lot can be earned on wine. After tasting it, Aints enthusiastically notes its strength and says he had never tried anything like it before. He wants to sell it at 20 times the usual price, but Almas responds with a counteroffer at least 30 times higher, and this is stunning. Aints easily agreed, showing an understanding smile he himself did not fully understand, but knew that getting out of debt is difficult. The experienced merchant put a sheet with calculations on the table how much money the residents of Popol can earn now. Almas wanted to borrow 3 times more than indicated there. Aints proposed a simple condition. If Almas agrees to lower the price of paper until the debt is fully repaid, he will give the loan, and Almas agreed. They know Z believes in this. For now he can earn a little by selling paper. Although the debt is paid slowly, extra money will still come. A few weeks passed and Almas was already the lord of the Ashen Land, controlled by Ron and Soyan, collecting taxes from the people. The village head extends 4 large sacks and says these are this year's taxes. Ron asks the elder to wait because he wants to check a strange amount. The elder asks in surprise why he is being checked, saying he has never experienced this before. The tax should be 10 of the income, but the sacks seem too small for his land. Soyan reports that after inspection they found at least 10 more such missing sacks. Ron, filled with rage, rushes to the village head and demands explanations for this discrepancy, but the head only laughs and insists he gave everything. Ron, angry, ordered the elder to be arrested. He stubbornly refused to admit his guilt. Although he was already arrested, the elder did not back down and stubbornly insisted that Ron prove his guilt. Statistical reports show the harvests he mentioned were too small and no one wrote about crop failures. Soyan finds a secret cellar under the elder's house full of hidden wheat. Ron directly accuses him of this. He was accused of embezzlement, a serious crime. The village elder defended himself. He said collecting taxes is a risky business, and he took only a small portion. He praised Ron for his kindness and offered him a share to keep silent. Nearby, Soyan also accused the elder of bribery. He was sentenced to 70 lashes. The elder desperately begged mercy. Ron fiercely ordered him to do this, and he begged for mercy even from God himself. We returned to Ash Castle. Ron and Soyan met the newly arrived Earl and immediately told him about the meeting with the nobleman who tried to bribe them. They grumbled with irritation. It was already the 12th time, and no matter how much they did not want to, they had to acknowledge the hard work of Ron and the Soyans. They collected only 10 of the successful grain, but considering the census of people across the region, it was still a considerable amount, so now enough taxes could be collected to support the government and the country. Finally, taxes on farmers became clearer than before, and the initiative with unified equipment was going very well. Burroughs said with a smile that they managed to buy quality steel with borrowed money, so now they can start making rice threshers, which they will sell or rent to those who need them. Thanks to the new tools, the farmers were finally able to breathe life into the barren land, and the harvests sharply increased. When the report ended, Burroughs reminded Almas about the upcoming Harvest Festival, a great holiday in Rosses, where the nobility gathered, and of course, this interested him. Almas acknowledged the event, emphasized that it was better to avoid any clashes, but everyone still needed to prepare well, and meanwhile Ron Rosewood was appointed to announce the military draft across the country. The announcement spread alarm. Some feared that war was about to begin, others protested because they had more work in the fields. They said simply and firmly, "Enlistment is voluntary, no one is forced. They only took boys from 15 to 30, they paid with grain and the weapons, supposedly, God would provide, no need to buy." Their main task was to guard the house of God and prevent crimes. The recruits lived in a house near the fortress and trained the army daily. Early release was only given in case of injury or serious illness, although eventually they were granted deserved rest. Rosewood added, those interested should notify the village elder within 2 weeks, and if there were more applicants than places, 300 people would be selected through a competition. The peasants asked if it was possible not to register, and Rosewood decisively replied that no one would be forced for those who were in the fields from morning till evening. This was a real relief. Another in the crowd, a former elite royal guard, asked if they would take him if he signed up, and Rosewood firmly said they would take everyone who had skills and desire. He loudly announced to all gathered that regardless of status, everyone who wanted to join was welcome. There were more applications than expected, and Almas was pleasantly surprised. Most of the company's soldiers turned out to be conscripts from the village, and returning home after service, they often found their fields occupied. So without work, this recruitment became a bitter consolation for those who feared not getting into the registers. Those without registration risked going the way of crime. Ron, with anxiety in his voice, doubted whether they had enough resources to support even more soldiers, especially since the peasants had just been freed from taxes, and the soldiers were left without work. Ron, a soldier, asked again if everything would be all right, and Almas smiled, praised him for thinking not only about work but also about the economy, reassured everyone saying that although they were not rich, it was not so bad, and asked Ron if he knew why the company's government economy was so poor if it relied only on agricultural income. Unfortunately, they did not diversify sources of income. Everything depended on the sale of wine, paper, and taxes, and everything was arranged in a soldierly manner, so chaos prevailed. People began to choose their commanders, and he approached Rosewood to appoint him commander of the cavalry and entrust him with control over the slaves to be transferred, but Rosewood initially refused, not understanding why they chose him and not the more experienced Burroughs. Almas explained that Burroughs had never commanded cavalry, and since Rosewood was of humble origin and he was the best rider, Almas knew that he had good relations with Rhea, so Rosewood was perfect for this task. Jokingly, Almas nudged Rosewood to take the opportunity and marry Rhea to have more intimate communication with her. Almas decided that Ron would be responsible for the infantry and Grem for the archers. Rosewood accepted the role and promised to do his best in a few days when the 100 horses ordered by Tetra would be delivered. He was pleased to see how those dismounting were impressed by the splendor of their armor and said it was an honor for them to meet again. Meanwhile, no one expected the Iron to appear personally later. Rosewood began counting his horses and handed them over to the slaves. It were announced that they were carefully selected as war slaves for their qualities. Almas asked Rhea to translate for the slaves who greeted them, and immediately proclaimed himself their new master. One of the slaves heard this and loudly demanded food. Rhea was surprised by his impudence, but Almas did not move and ordered Tetra to prepare food, adding that the slaves would be allowed to wash once and tidy themselves up. When the preparation was over, Rosewood announced that he was their leader and that they were being sent to fight in the cavalry, assuring that if they performed well, it could open the way to freedom. The rebellious slaves from the previous step, although agreeing to hard work, persistently demanded a meeting with the one who could truly grant them freedom. Rose agreed if Verger defeated him in battle, he would gain freedom. If not, he would have to obey Rhea. Rosewood did not waste time. He immediately told Almas what had happened, and everyone gathered right away to watch the match. Rosewood easily won, enchanting the audience with lightning-fast and flawless skill in battle. It was clear Aints noticed how Rosewood dodged the opponent's attack and immediately launched a counterattack. Ain suddenly realized ordinary people are not capable of this and decided that Rose would maintain balance only thanks to his agility and those extraordinary powers that came with the imperial blessing. In the Ashen Palace, Almas and Tetra greeted them joyfully when they returned. Almas reassured that Rosewood was fine with cavalry training. He said that both the military and political situation were calm, so it remained only to wait for the festival day, and Soyan reported that a young couple had come to him requesting an audience but without any documents. Almas, now a lord, was wary of strangers they could be dangerous, so he suggested sending the visitors away, although he himself found them interesting and thought it was worth meeting them. Interested, Almas asked why, and Soyan explained. The woman was an architect, the man a researcher from the Crimson Empire. She wanted to work in her profession. Almas felt that they currently lacked such talent and agreed it was necessary to meet them. A man who called himself a traveler of the world passionately claimed that he had visited all continents. Almas invited him to the office for a meeting, and the architect, introducing himself, immediately unfolded sketches. He boasted that he could design any structure, showed drawings of houses, bridges, and even siege engines, catapults, and ballistae, and Almas, not hiding his surprise, asked why they had chosen his small country to showcase their talent. The architect honestly admitted that he preferred to build a career in a small company in a small kingdom rather than be a mere rank and file in a large one. Almas sensed this, and instead of hiring him, immediately wanted to meet first, and impressed by his skill entrusted him with a promising task of arrangement as an official job. Depending on the results, the architect, grateful for the chance, promised not to let him down. Then he named himself Saimi and, smiling mysteriously, said that he came from a distant western empire known as the Silk Land. He had just finished searching for the end of the world and wanted to describe his journey in a book. The classic materials, sheepskin and papyrus, turned out to be too expensive for him, so he came across paper from the kingdom of Almas and considered it the best material for his book. Almas felt that he finally had a chance to make a name for himself and agreed to provide the paper, but on one condition, that he would be the first to see Almas's finished book. Setting off according to plan to the capital Roses to participate in the harvest festival, Almas looked around with interest and asked if this was really the star of his festival, and looking around the place, he was surprised to notice that there were even more people here than at their last wedding. Raman stood by the gates, warmly greeted his son, and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. Almas pointed to a large barrel and said that he had brought festive wine. Before leaving, he warned his father not to drink too much. Raymond's wine was quite strong. Promising to warn others and agreeing to talk with his son later, Raymond led them to the main family gathering place. Quickly leaving Tetra, Raymond looked around the crowd with interest, wondering if influential families had gathered here. They noticed several people who had been at their wedding. Almas smiled and told Tetra that their task now was to gain more allies, so they needed to be friendly. Tetra added that they should stay away from a man named Regar, because their territories bordered, but there was no reason to start a conflict. Almas brought 2 drinks, holding them in his hands, smiled, and asked Tetra which one he wanted. Tetra noticed that there were many children with their parents at the party, and then Almas approached him again to ask which drink he would choose first. Almas asked confusedly what he meant when he said that children want a boy or a girl first, and why he suddenly said that, and Tetra shrugged and replied that he didn't care if a girl came first and then a boy. That was fine too. He just thought that a boy would grow up to be a warrior faster, so it was better to have a boy first, to which Almas laughed and said that if Tetra thought so, he didn't mind. He gestured, if a boy comes first, the next should be a girl. Tetra asked Almas about his plans, and he, smiling, asked in response if he was going to have many children. He himself was not sure, but as long as there were about equal numbers of boys and girls, it didn't matter to him. Almas suggested postponing this topic for later. They were still at the party, so they decided to look for something to eat first. At that moment, a group of people approached Almas, and recalling the last words of King Fermi, a request to make him happy, asked him to tell about his fight with the king. Almas hesitated for a long time. The message pressed on his heart, but he still desired Tetra's happiness. Almas confirmed his love for Tetra, because he knew that Tetra would never change his girl. The crowd buzzed. Did Almas still not have that necessary aura? Other girls picked up saying it was better for someone else to take care of him, and Almas suddenly realized that the girls around dreamed of becoming his second wife. The crowd pressed around him, and he found himself pushed to the very edge. Tetra sharply pulled Almas out. She said she wanted to introduce him to a dish that never appears in their land. Almas sighed with relief, as if escaping from constant noise, and kept thanking his wife. Tetra glanced at Almas and said, "If you decide to marry again, I will not stand in your way, but beware that it does not break the happiness of our family." Almas replied, because he knew he could make a joke out of anything. While they were still talking, Regar quietly sneaked up from the side to Tetra, and she noticed him first. He whispered quietly, indignantly wondering why he had brought so many servants with him, and almost warned that the man was strict. When he approached, everyone laughed loudly, rejoicing at the meeting with Almaz and Tetra and sincerely congratulating them on their marriage. Almaz shook Rhaegar's hand once more and thought that he turned out to be friendlier than expected. Rhaegar apologized for not being at their wedding, saying he rarely gets sick, but unfortunately, on that special day she fell ill. She tightly squeezed Almaz's hand, and in that smile he felt her pity. Secretly twisted a finger like a silent sign, "Take care of your health." Rhaegar groans in pain, let go and unleashed a storm of loud swearing on Almaz. It attracted the attention of many of his subordinates. As he was leaving, Almaz threw to Ron, "Don't fall for provocations and be careful when they are nearby. It's easy to surround them." Then Yuria greeted Almaz and Tetra, glanced across the room. Their Rhaegar was just courting several girls. Almaz felt that it was all because of the people from Griffin's shelter. It was with them that he wanted to spend most of his time. He wanted to see him happy, like Tetra, although he himself was drawn to Yuria, but Yuria already had a fiancé and was going to get married. Before leaving, Yuria quietly slipped a piece of paper into his hand and barely audibly asked to meet. Popel approached Almaz and, with burning interest, asked to tell about your fight with King Firm. The last words of King Fermi to Almaz again surfaced in memory about making him happy. Almaz thought about it for a long time. The message weighed on his heart, but he also desired Tetra's happiness, and knowing that Tetra would never change the girl confirmed his love for her. Tetra froze for a moment, then sat opposite Almaz and quietly, almost whispering, said that she was his wife. As a wife, she had less power than the husband, the head of the family, and could not contradict his last decision. Almaz sincerely asked Tetra to share her true feelings. He did not want to force his wife to open up. Tetra confessed that she loved Almaz, the man who always knew how to make wise decisions, and believed that with his leadership everything would be fine. She knew that people sometimes hesitate, it was normal, but she did not want him to give his decisions to others. Tetra insisted that Almaz decide about Yuria himself and not worry too much about her. In the Romelian forest, Almaz decided to go in search of Griffin. He told Griffin everything that had happened to him, and soon Griffin understood Almaz wanted to marry Yuria. Yuria was the boss's daughter, and therefore marriage to her would turn Almaz into a newcomer in the group, and every week many would challenge his leadership, which could escalate into war. Almaz agreed, but turned to Griffin, carefully choosing his words. Griffin did not care, and he asked if Almaz would listen to his advice. Almaz said directly that he came not to decide, but to ask for advice. Griffin simply replied, "If you want to marry Yuria, marry her." Almaz, with anxiety in his voice, warned this could ignite a war that would harm them. Griffin threw out whether they will help Almaz or not, only they themselves decide. And Almaz did not need to worry. Griffin did not understand why he was so upset about quarrels in the group and asked if it was necessary to win. Almaz decisively said that he must win. Recalling Griffin's words, he killed without any pangs of conscience. Griffin, who was listening, he admitted that he said those words to people who were a pack among them, were merciless killers, and such a pack could neither protect him nor live alongside them. Griffin told Almaz that he was different because he followed rules that the pack itself did not follow. He is the only one who can influence them and stands outside the herd's rules, so it does not matter whether Almaz belongs to the herd. Griffin says it is better that he, though not of their number, could still protect them now that Almaz has become the ruler. He must fulfill his duty to the herd and keep his eyes on what is more important than trifles. Griffin sternly warns, listen carefully. If something impossible tries to break into this world, it will not happen at all, and when a lion becomes the leader, he destroys the descendants of the previous leader. If Almaz hesitates with the choice, he will regret it. The most painful will be the realization that he did not decide himself or gave the decision to Griffin. He must decide quickly to accept or reject, and Almaz feels that in any case he will regret his choice, because both options are bad. He thanks Griffin for thinking everything through well, and Griffin sees that Almaz has already made a decision. In the kingdom of the King of Roses, he, with a voice trembling from tension, asked Almaz, "Have you already made a decision?" But first Almaz sincerely thanks him for taking his decision into account. He knows well how shameful it is to ask. But here he asks for Yuria's hand, and his whole country turns its gaze to her. He asks if she will agree to become his wife. Raymond laughed, suddenly realizing that he decided almost faster than he himself thought. Everyone was already waiting for this to happen next week, and he was even going to persuade her if it dragged on, so everyone accepted his quick decision with relief. Embarrassed, Yuria asked the king if he had given him only 3 days, or if he was not that king. The king, stunned, could not believe that everything would be decided in 3 days, and said that then he could not make such an important decision, because he even had plans for a month, although he knew he would not survive then. Almaz looked at Yuri and called him by name in a gentle voice, and Yuri laughed loudly, thinking that under time pressure, he would make a decision faster and not notice his daughter's foolish actions. The king wholeheartedly wanted to thank those who helped Almaz make this choice. Someone asked what Almaz intended to do when he became king, and he confidently replied that he wanted to unite the Adelina Peninsula. The king only exclaimed what a grand plan it was, looking at the people's reaction. Almaz laughed loudly, saying he was joking, although secretly thinking about the royal dream. All this seemed incredible, and already in the next issue everyone standing before him announced the marriage and finally, Almaz's ascension to the throne. Almaz suggested speeding up the matter and finishing it in 2 days, and the king understood and said that in 2 days he would not have time to prepare the troops. He asked if Almaz planned to raise an army immediately after the coronation and send it to destroy all the nobles who did not come to the ceremony. More precisely, Almaz wanted to assemble the troops even before the ceremony itself, and the king said he wanted to abdicate during his lifetime to leave peacefully, and agreed that it was better to do it now while he was still alive. But here is the trouble. Almaz lacked a significant military victory to sit on the throne, and when the king warned that the kingdom of Morar would soon attack, he decided to temporarily transfer command to Almaz until the critical time to move and defeat the enemy. He was sure that action would have to be taken within the next 3 years. Almaz worried whether the king would live until then, but he reassured him. He would reveal his knowledge of voodoo which watches over him and would tell all the details later. Almaz had to inform Tetra and keep it secret. Tetra sat down, quieted, and listened carefully as Almaz and Yuria apologized and explained everything. She laughed, said she understood and was glad to hear it, and then asked Yuria what she was apologizing for. Yuria openly admitted that she dreamed of marrying Almaz and becoming his main wife if he married her. She would eventually become queen, and this would overturn Tetra's position. Tetra honestly said that she was not upset at all and did not worry about status because whatever the situation, she would always remain Almaz's first wife. Tetra insisted that status did not matter, only love was important, and it was clear that Yuria was more concerned about position. Hearing this, Yuria angrily asked what she meant because it sounded as if Tetra was aiming for the role of Almaz's main wife. Almaz calmed those present with a firm voice and said that after this, both Yuri and Tetra would be able to live as before. He called everyone to the conference hall and ordered Ron to close the doors. Boris admitted that he did not think Almaz would summon everyone here. Bartolo laughed and added that it seemed like an important statement was about to be made, and this made everyone tense. And then Almaz immediately announced that he would marry Yuri, and Ron asked if this meant that he would inherit the throne. Since Soyan heard that Yuri was marrying Rhaegar, he was worried, but now this news pleased him. Rosewood, more serious than the others, asked Almaz if he had decided to fight DBL. Almaz sincerely admitted that this was the cause of all their problems, and apologized for dragging everyone into such trouble. Grem said that it was too late to torment oneself with remorse honestly. No one here likes such an attitude. Burrose greeted him, but unfortunately still wanted to ask about Tetra's hearing. Almaz instantly embraced Tetra, and gently whispered that she was still his wife. She might not be the main one, but he would never reject his Almaz. He also promised everyone that even becoming king, he would not leave the position of leader of Ash Bartolu. He exclaimed that he was wildly happy Princess Yura had finally found her prince, but everyone understood. It was not only about the D family, but all the other noble families would definitely rise against this. Almaz had to devise a flawless plan for this very moment. Everyone was already informed about his plan to attack King de Morgar in case of invasion, and at least this was supposed to restrain the resistance of the noble families on the border between the lands of Ash and Debel. Gilbert, the cousin of Lord Dable and ruler of these lands, summoned all the peasants. He looked at the recently collected grain tax and sharply accused the village elder of fraud. The elder bowed and insisted that this was all he had asked from the village as a postponement until next year, and promised to compensate for this year's shortfall, along with payments for the next year. Gilbert drove the old man away, cursed, doubted whether the tribe leader still had money for this year's clothes, and ordered the soldiers to search the storeroom and dig up everything buried in the ground, pointing to their seeds. They found Gilbert and approached the leader with a question about what they were doing. The old man burst into tears, his voice trembled, and he explained that it was the village's seed for sowing next year. If they took it, they would be ruined. Gilbert mercilessly offered them seeds on the condition that they return them next year with a large interest, looked at the peasants as if asking why they dared to look at him like that, and warned that it was not hard for him to guess their thoughts. Suddenly he noticed a girl who was not from the village, asked if she had come from somewhere and if she had paid taxes to that couple, and she fell to her knees, begging for mercy for her husband, and swearing to pay everything next month. Then Gilbert said he would forget her taxes on one condition. She must be with him first, promised that after that no one would bother them anymore, and gently led Isma to the border fortress. He immediately realized the fortress construction method was outdated by about 200 years. Although the craftsmen were skilled, there were blind spots in the structure. During an attack, the fortress could be easily taken. There were many weak points where people constantly crowded each other, and honestly, the place cried out for serious repairs. Alma said that there was no better stone than in the Ash country, so he turned to Tetra and asked if she knew of good mines nearby. If he was not mistaken, the Dibble region gave the best stone in the kingdom, but no one rushed there. Tetra replied that it was precisely because there was the best stone, not because of a lack of others, and advised taking stone from the Kingdom of Roses. Agreeing with this proposal, Almaz said that he would go. Isma, shining with excitement, said that she would soon finalize her design, just a few tweaks to fit the newly completed new version, and when Almaz and Tetra returned to the castle, Ron told them about the events. Burrows reported that refugees from Debble had come to them, and Almaz asked how many there were and if there was any news from the D family. Burrows said there were about 200 people there, and no news from D now. Almaz exclaimed in surprise how it was possible to lose 200 people and notice nothing. He needed to know who here was aware of this, so Burrows began naming everyone in the room, even Ron, because some of Ron's soldiers accidentally came across these refugees while patrolling the border and afterward decided to keep the matter secret. So it was necessary to act carefully and not be afraid that someone would tell Almaz. The refugees' representative pleaded with him to accept them. They came to the Almaz region because they could no longer afford to pay rent and land taxes. Those took 30 of their income, and even clothing, fruit, marriage, and Almasram itself were taxed. Almaz awkwardly could not understand those strange taxes. Ron explained that the marriage tax was more of a wedding gift to God than a payment to the marrying family, and the girl added that the relatives of the Dibble family could do anything from theft to murder, and no one bothered them. Will Almaz say that he understands this and that they can return to their people, to Earl, who went to check and confirm the girl's story. Sometimes it even came to the point that they were forced to sell their children. Almaz asked Burrows what he thought about this. Burrows replied that even during Lagos's reign, he had heard many grim stories about how D refugees poured into Almaz, and he wondered why the situation was always so bad. Now everyone wants to know what Almaz's plan is. He firmly believes that Rhaegar will not let those who leave his lands go just like that. Almaz asked Burrows if they could pretend they knew nothing, and Burrows agreed, but warned that in different regions people need permits from both rulers, so if Almaz decides to shelter these refugees, it will be against the law. However, if he does decide to protect them, knowing their situation, King Roses will consider the case in court and side with him. They are ready to support him, believe there will be no problems, but it is better to keep everything secret. Almaz decided to settle the refugees in a village deep in the forest, as Rhea just said. Rhea met more workers, and after a few days in the Ashen Land, hurriedly informed Almaz that Rhaegar had arrived, and Almaz immediately asked if he was already here and how many people he brought. It turned out that Rhaegar brought only a few guards. Almaz thought that he arrived earlier than expected and was surprised where he could know so much about the refugee situation. So he ordered Sion to greet Rhaegar warmly and prepare food. They hoped that Rhaegar would become less aggressive if he ate enough, and they planned to lower their guard as soon as everything was over. Almaz, already ready to let Rhaegar in, laughs loudly, thanks him for the hospitality, and slowly begins to eat. He is amazed. Rhaegar is more obedient than he expected, and this confuses him a little. It is unclear whether because he is full or because of something else, so Almaz decides to ask after the meal. He asks about the wind that brought him here, and Rhaegar says that people really fled from their lands, and probably some are seeking refuge in these parts, after which he himself asks if Almaz knows anything about this. They definitely know, but Almaz insists he won't reveal this to anyone, except fools. He sincerely apologizes, says he knows nothing, and promises to start an investigation soon. Almaz doesn't need to know the truth, but he is sure. He erased all traces of the refugees, and without other evidence no one can make any claims. The one who speaks deliberately says that according to the kingdom's laws, a permit from God is required to move from one territory to another, hoping Almaz will understand the hint. But as soon as he comes across any refugees, he will immediately expose them. Almaz and Tetra stand upright and watch as a group of Rhaegars departs. They never thought the refugees could be their trap, but it turns out they were wrong, so now their task is to wait and watch what the next move will be. Rhaegar returned to his lands, enraged. He scolded everyone on the road and ordered Bernard and Gilbert to be summoned immediately. Gilbert, although he knew the refugees were from the village under his supervision, was sure. They set off to the Ash region and could hardly have passed the Ash zone unnoticed. The journey there would take several days, so they could not have slipped from his attention. When Clyde reported that there was no evidence for trial, Gilbert had no choice but to drop the case. But Rhaegar at least managed to warn them secretly. He says that as soon as the next conflict with Almaz flares up, they will use it as a pretext and start threatening them. Within a week, tension increased. a large group of refugees from Dibble arrived in Ash, and as soon as Gilbert's troops noticed this, they deployed 1,000 soldiers at the border, and over 1,000 warriors stood nearby. Ignoring this was impossible. Almaz ordered 700 of his soldiers and 300 reservists to be sent to the border, asked Burrows if he could do it now, and Bartolo shouted that he was always ready and would stand guard with 1,000 able-bodied men. Tetra asked Almaz if he intended to attack Dibble. He replied of course not, now only caution and vigilance are needed. The Dibble army crossed the border. Bartolo laughed and said it would be interesting if this escalated into a fight, a great opportunity for everyone, perhaps to kill Rhaegar. Almaz says he rarely hears such words from him, but warns, if he starts an unnecessary war, everyone will become even more cautious towards him, and this could cause problems with marriage and inheritance in the future. Unfortunately, they say Bartolo had to leave barely arriving to prepare for any possibilities. When he arrived, he was informed that Bemet advised bringing troops here, but Almaz calmly explained. First, he brought Debel's soldiers to the border and assured that he would not fight unless they attacked Ash people or crossed the line. After some time, Bartolo noticed a group of refugees reach the place. They seemed to be on the other side of the fence, and to go further, they would have to cross it. And although there were 1,000 of them, half were women and elderly, so crossing the river would be difficult for them. Almaz only hoped that nothing bad would happen while cries for help and pleas for mercy echoed around. Hearing Bartolomeu say that the refugees were already breaking through the barrier was terrible, like a one-sided massacre. Ron loudly shouted to Almaz, begging to save the innocent, especially children, and Almaz replied that their words did not matter after all. He could not go there himself. Among the numerous young men who happened to be on the riverbank, he was the one whose wife Gilbert took. A few days ago, exactly when his wife returned, she hanged herself immediately. He no longer had strength. When he stayed in the village, all memories of his wife turned into nightmares. Now he just ran with others without a clear purpose. Round him, the old and children were mercilessly killed. He constantly asked Almaz for help, but no one understood that it did not concern them at all. Then he came up with a plan how to attract the attention of Soldier Gilbert. He kept shooting arrows and, taking advantage of the chance, finally rushed to Almaz. At the very moment when one arrow fell into the river among the ranks of Gilbert's attackers, someone from the Ash tribe, drawing another arrow, asked Bartolo if he considered it a coincidence. He said he did not think so, therefore it was not a coincidence. Then he asked, could this act ignite a war? Bartolo replied, no one has the right to shoot the king, and they should declare that they have no hostile intentions. Bartolo looked at the young man who had just died in the river and thought the same. Although he did not know his name, he could understand his feelings, and now his goal was achieved, he could rest peacefully with Almaz. Raising the arrow above his head and shouting loudly to attract everyone's attention, he announced that the Debel army had just attacked them, and from now on the war begins. The Ash army cried out in despair, calling it unacceptable, and he cursed Gilbert for his foolishness in daring to shoot an arrow into their territory. Seeing the situation worsen, the Debel army tried to flee on Almaz's orders, and Bartolo ignored them and first began to protect the refugees. The next day in the Kingdom of Roses, the king could not believe that Almaz was capable of this. He always considered him calmer. Almaz sincerely knelt and apologized, and Raymond nearby shouted that God had abandoned them since then, although in reality people had already begun to follow Almaz. The king decisively declared that a ruler should not act rashly, and Raymond spoiled his son. In the end, Almaz saved many refugees and regretted nothing, but he sincerely pitied the king who was judged. Instead of harsher punishment, the king demanded a sacred duel to put an end to the matter. In other words, Almaz had to fight to determine who was right and who was guilty. Raymond said that this time his son had enough evidence, and according to the king's verdict, the duel was unnecessary. Almaz could refuse, but it would damage his honor. People would call him a coward or say he was a liar. He was sure he invented this move himself and wanted to clear his name after defeat, so he asked if they would agree to it, but there were no guarantees of victory, and Raymond told his son that although he was a foolish Rhaegar, he was the strongest man in the kingdom and stronger than everyone. That is why he decided to arrange a duel. Almaz recalled their arm wrestling at the party. Although he won then, he had to admit that Rhaegar was stronger, and he began to wonder if he had some blessing. Yuria found out and also understood everything, said yes, Rhaegar really has a blessing similar to Almaz's, and when Almaz asked if it often happens that many people have the same gift, Yuria replied that in her opinion very few receive royal permission for such. She also recalled that her own gift was similar to Rhaegar's, which, according to the king, was a real wonder. The king did not want to rely on uncertain power, but if Almaz was confident he could defeat Belmet, he was ready to allow the duel, and if Almaz wins, he would finally crush the influence of the Dibble family and at the same time establish himself as the next king. Almaz asked about the rules of the first duel, and Yuria explained. It is a one-on-one fight. The judge will be the high priest who decides who will win. The duel lasts until death. The winner will be the one who kills the opponent, but the priest can declare victory earlier if someone loses consciousness twice or surrenders. Almas can choose weapons to his liking, but out of respect for ancient tradition, it is not fitting for him to use a long-range. One people will look down on him if he does so. Alma said he understood and agreed to the duel. The king promised to convey this to Rigger, and the duel would begin in a week. Everyone relived this story once more to meet Griffin and tell him everything he said. He finally understood. The sword was needed not for sale, but to be used. Griffin gave Almas a bunch of swords, but only one of them caused him pain forged from dragon Damascus steel. Belmont whispered to Rigger that he was ordered, when Almas returns, not to bring his sword back because it smells too strongly. Rigger honestly never believed that Almas would agree to this fight, laughed and said it didn't matter, he just needed to win the duel. He asked if Bernard thought he couldn't win, and assured that he was the strongest in the kingdom, although it was worth preparing for surprises, and laughed loudly again, saying they worried too much. The day of the duel came quickly. Yuri had to admit that he lost this fight and was wrong by prior agreement. He was to lose his land and property. Almas thought that this was his first duel against an opponent with a blessing, and even against one who had the same blessing as his sword. With a simple blade, he would have had no chance against such power, but with the Griffin's sword, he felt completely different. Full of strength and confident in battle, Almas instantly caught Rigger's weak spot. Rigger fully relied on his seemingly blessed swordsmanship, although in reality he only knew a little about fencing. He made a lot of unnecessary moves that Almas didn't even have to think about. If that was all he had, it was not enough to defeat King Fermi. Almas ended the fight with one move, even before Rigger could beg for mercy and surrender. The sacred duel ended with Almas's victory. The Diable family had to give all their possessions and lands to the Ash family, and even send the king a letter of apology. Almas glanced at Rigger, who angered him, and suddenly saw clearly. His autocracy was the root of this trouble. It deeply moved him, and he sincerely wanted Rigger to change and become better when he returned. Almas did not expect the king to reproach even his own relatives, who loudly applauded him. He was ashamed and dreamed that next time they would not support him blindly, and the next day returning to the palace, he received praise from the king for his deed, and said himself that he did not kill Rigger because he did not want to become a bloodthirsty person. The king answered sadly, Almusu would be better off not killing Rigger, it would only increase hatred towards him, even though he did kill him. Unfortunately, the D family did not calm their grievances. They did not let the king rest, asking what good came from Rigger surrendering in the sacred duel. Now everyone would see him as a coward, and this destroys the honor of the Diable family. Yuria then said that he was sure the nobles who supported Rigger had already fled, while other barons were getting closer or had blood ties with the D family. Almas was looking for reasons to stay away. Now he asked himself, is surrendering in a duel really that bad? Yurit insisted that he listen. Surrendering in a sacred duel offers more benefits than it seems, especially since even nobles became warriors as soon as they entered a duel. The only acceptable outcome is victory or death, and don't forget, Rigger was the one who challenged him from the very beginning. Rai strictly ordered his son to listen carefully. People expected two things: good governance and war, and everyone knew their downsides well. The only thing that truly distinguished Rigger was his combat skills, better than most, so in this people saw a true superhero in him. He lost to the king in battle, and since then he did not have to stubbornly cling to every detail of the arranged marriage if he said he did not want to give Yuria to a man who surrendered in a sacred duel. It was a completely understandable and acceptable reason. Yuria impatiently asked her father if this was really serious, and the king answered as before. He had no reason to give his daughter to Rigger. He asked everyone not to confuse. This does not mean he will accept Almas, but the throne cannot remain empty for long. Their wedding will be announced soon, and I asked if it would be better for Almas to do something extraordinary, because the king already said they did not need great feats. Honestly, he wants to strengthen the kingdom before the war with Demorger, so this marriage could be the perfect means for that, but there is another problem: they need to find a way to get rid of it. Most of Rigger's followers are people of bad blood, but Belmont is different. He is a loyal subject from the family, and competent people are around him. The nobles sincerely trusted him, and not without reason. He was the one holding the family. The conversation turned to royal diplomacy. The king sighed that it is difficult for any kingdom to attract his attention, and Almas suggested establishing good relations or even an alliance with the kingdom of Alva. Unfortunately, this immediately attracted the attention of the nomadic kingdom of Alva, east of the kingdom of Raz, which is famous for its people crossing the volcanic belt. Recently, the Ash family created a detachment of German cavalry thanks to them. He heard about the nomadic nation from Demorger mines and realized, if they intervene in the war, they will become stronger than this kingdom. Direct confrontation is impossible to win. Raz meant that I would be driven into a defensive battle, so the existence of cavalry is extremely important for the Adelia society. so pay maximum attention to the preparation of Raz's cavalry, because cavalry gives an advantage over other kingdoms. Now the burning question is, how to get war horses. Alma said he wants to buy war horses from the people of Alva, or even hire some of their mercenaries. The king understands this, but the language barrier between them could completely ruin the deal. The king decided to personally invite everyone they had contacted and hear them himself, so Aints was called, because he already had dealings with the people of Alva and has to tell about them. Inez said that their ancestors, horsemen, ruled the besieged land, and the Alva Mountains, like a living wall, cut them off from the whole world. Their population is very small. He heard that there are only about 1,000 people there. In childhood, they oddly pressed their noses with a bar so that their faces looked fiercer and scared the enemies. Aints calmed everyone. Don't worry and don't do this on your own noses, it's wasteful. Sometimes they trade goods with the Alva's wool and other merchandise, because those hidden behind the mountains hardly know war, and Bartolome thought that this is exactly why Alvian horsemen could very well be near them. He also thinks that they are concerned about the continuation of the conquest of Damager to the southern Roses, and Bartolome was sent as an envoy to the land of Alva. The Devourers urgently gathered and instantly chose Almas to lead the defense against the invincible invasion of Amorgar. Almas took command with unwavering confidence, resolutely determined to defend the lands of Ash and secure victory for his people. Yulia warmly supported Almes, although she could not join. She remained nearby, a quiet, soothing presence in the tense hall. Almas entrusted the capital to Yulia. She swore to protect it while he led the battle. Almes learned that Damorgan's army had about 25,000 soldiers, truly a formidable enemy force. Ash's troops only 13,000, many homes turned away from them, so even the smallest offense here causes anxiety. Despite unrealistic odds and political betrayals, they barely maintained optimism and were ready to fight the invading army. The army was approaching Fort Talia, a newly repaired fortification that was the key to their defense. Almas ordered the soldiers to rest, while he himself actively told the recruits about the fort's defense and its recent improvements. Almas returned home and together with Tetra, gloomily discussed their tiny chances of winning against 25,000 soldiers. They decided to cut off the enemy's supplies and play on Damorgar's bad relations with neighboring countries. Tetra sincerely said that she believed in Almas's victory and encouraged him before the battle. The message struck like thunder. Enemy soldiers were spotted nearby, and Almas had to act immediately. Almas and Tetra silently watched the huge Damorgan army preparing for the invasion and realized how terrible this threat was. The 7-day battle begins, and on Tetra's confident advice, Almas himself is appointed the true commander. The Damorgan army relentlessly advances, preparing for the clash, and tension is rising all around. Tenino, an officer of Damorgar, passionately discusses his confidence in the battle with Carlo, the commander and first prince of Damorgar. Tenino, calling himself a general, sits in silence and closely watches Carlo, his leadership, and the army's readiness. Tenino criticizes Carlos's talent, but at the same time respects how skillfully he delegates matters to others and takes responsibility. Tenino sincerely believes that united under Carlo's leadership, they can conquer Adelnia together, and he sincerely promises this. Carlo reveals his plan, first to capture the lands of Ash, and only then to seek peace so as not to rush immediately into war with Roses. The Damorgar army is advancing on Fort Telia, refining the siege plan and preparing a decisive encirclement as soon as they arrive. We received news. The fortifications of Fort Telia are divided into 3 parts. There is a garrison of 8,000 soldiers stationed there. The commanders decide to concentrate troops at the northern gates of the fort, leaving the southern side weakly defended. Tenino warns supplies are limited, so it is vital to immediately take control of the supply route. Ignoring the fort means simply exposing oneself to a pincer attack. To survive, retreat routes must be reliably prepared. Tenino suggests first cautiously testing the enemy's combat strength to throw slave warriors into battle. From the western tower of Fort Telia, Almas and Ron see the first wave of the enemy rapidly advancing. The enemy is carrying logs and firewood. It seems they are preparing to fill the moat and break through our defense. Almas commanded the archers, release a hail of arrows towards the advancing enemies. Arrows whistle through the air and strike in vain. The enemy hides behind the logs. Although the arrow missed, the enemy's lack of armor seems to give him natural protection from the blow. Almas calculates the enemy's cunning. They drop their armor to run faster and grab logs, making shields and tools out of them at the same time. The enemy rushes swiftly to the ditch, dodging arrows, and Almas loudly orders the defenders not to cease fire. Almas sees some enemies throwing themselves into the ditch. This reveals their despair and determination. The enemies tie logs underwater, as if building a bridge to cross the ditch. Almas looks as if he cannot believe his eyes as the enemy tries to climb the fortress using that shaky ladder. Without hesitation, Almas aims and with precise shots holds back the enemy trying to climb over the wall, defending the fortress. When the enemies climb up unarmed, they are powerless, many slip and fall, and those who remain are easily defeated by the defenders. Faced with heavy losses, the enemy abandoned the assault and hastily retreated to their lines. Although they retreated, a fierce dispute broke out among the defenders, whether to continue attacks or conserve arrows and men. Tenino heard that several slave soldiers survived and returned to report to the commanders about the failed assault. Tenino mercilessly orders the execution of the returning slaves, along with their families' betrayal, is punished harshly and cold-bloodedly. The archers instantly finish off the captured slaves. This vividly shows how ruthless Damorger is towards defeats and failures. Tenino exclaims, "Next wave," joyfully celebrating the construction of the bridge that allowed an excursion across the moat. Suddenly the bridge explodes, shocking the Damorger army and disrupting their carefully planned siege strategy. The commanders are tense, nervously discussing the explosives and anxiously asking themselves whether this failure means the collapse of Tenino's strategy. Tenino admits failure, but assures that preparations for the next assault continue, even though progress on the fort has been lost. The siege towers are already erected, and ready. The Damorger army is about to launch a full assault. A watchful gaze reveals the defense of Fort Tilia. On each tower the commanders are tense, planning strategy. From the central tower, the defenders saw with relief the retreat of enemy slave soldiers. This was proof that the defense succeeded. Almas and Tetra carefully inspect the towers, attentively searching for any damage, and confirm Fort Tilia is structurally undamaged after the attack. The defenders noticed the approaching siege towers and realized the real enemy army has finally entered the battlefield. The enemy advances shields and earthworks, closing the distance to rush Fort Tilia. Shields and cover push soldiers right up to the walls. It is clear that a large-scale, coordinated assault on the fortress is approaching. The defenders respond with a hail of arrows on the infantry, shooting accurately and desperately trying to stop the enemy's advance. Archers firmly hold the line above the moat and loudly call to the infantry, "Do not pay attention to the towers, focus the attacks." The siege tower was advancing on Fort Tilia, packed with enemy soldiers ready to break through the fortress walls. Archers in the towers suddenly opened fire, catching the defenders by surprise. They instantly rushed to hide from the hail of arrows. The defender tensed enemy soldiers with shields were rapidly approaching the fort walls. Almas announces that he will deploy the newly built catapults for a counterattack. His goal is simple: to sow chaos in the enemy ranks. The catapult was loaded and fired. A new phase of the fort's defense began. The catapult hurls a giant projectile toward the siege tower, trying to quickly destroy the enemy's advance. The tower explodes wildly. It is clear it was filled with black powder to cause maximum destruction. Although the explosion thundered, the tower stood inside was an unusual frame that saved it from destruction. Watching the fort's defense, the defenders suddenly realized with horror, the enemy is strengthening their towers with voodoo rituals. The towers are clad in wet skin and cold metal, woven with magic to withstand the explosions. The assault tower moves forward, the defenders duck and tighten their shields, and the archers inside prepare to unleash a true hail of arrows on the walls. The defenders instantly realized, before them were not slaves with light weapons, but soldiers in heavy armor, hardened and well-trained. Tetra recognizes the enemy commander, and like an experienced officer, confidently and precisely gives orders to the soldiers coordinating the artillery attack. The archers tighten their bows and aim at the commander. Their goal is to disrupt the enemy's organized command chain. The defenders open aimed fire, hoping to disable the enemy commanders and break the pace of their assault. The siege towers relentlessly loom over the walls of Fortella, challenging the defenders' hopes to stop their advance. The battle erupts. The defenders shout desperately, trying with all their might to repel the enemies rushing into the tower. Enemy soldiers climb the tower, preparing to engage in hand-to-hand combat to capture the fortress. Defender Ron fights fiercely on the assault tower platform, repelling enemy soldiers with powerful blows. Enemy archers fiercely shoot arrows, trying to knock the defender off the edge of the tower. Ron swiftly knocks enemies off the tower, keeps everything under control, and does not let them breach the walls. Ron ordered the defenders to keep watch. He is resolutely ready to block the path of any enemy daring to pass the narrow trail. Arrows rain around, and Ron stands confidently, ready to meet each of these projectiles, vigilant amid the chaos of the battlefield. Captain Ron gathers his thoughts again, clenches his will, and is ready to fight side by side with Yosef to hold their siege tower. Yosef rushes into battle and, desperately clinging on, holds their position, while Ron supports him clearly and decisively, giving strategic orders. Their efforts impress the defenders and raise morale as they shoulder-to-shoulder repel enemy attacks. Spectators say that Ron and Yosef are the strongest swordsmen, and they are confident no breakthroughs will break them. Meanwhile, the rest of the soldiers are gripped by panic. Enemy assault towers are already approaching the walls, preparing to breach the defense. The enemy aggressively pushes forward, breaking through shield walls and launching direct, brutal assaults. Commanders shout orders, defenders form a strong wall, and archers surround the advancing enemies. The defenders fight desperately, and the enemies mercilessly break through the wall, storming it with ladders and siege engines. Alarm-howled boats approached under the wall, a clear sign that the enemy is preparing to outflank us. The enemy turns the boats into floating platforms, builds improvised steps and supports from them, and climbs the fort walls. The defenders are stunned. They discovered enemy plans, coordinated ladder assaults, and some commanders are drinking amid the chaos. An enemy soldier was thrown down, but the defenders are worried the main strike seems aimed at the western tower. Commanders tensely discuss the enemy's plans and realize with horror, the eastern tower is guarded by battle-hardened fighters. A commotion begins. They prepare a new powerful siege weapon created by Almas for battle to repel the attackers. The commanders give the signal open fire. It must be a simultaneous attack to intimidate the enemies. The new weapon opens fire. The defenders are struck by its unexpected, incredibly powerful destructive force. The cannonball crashed into the siege towers, causing devastating explosions and threatening the enemy's advance. Huge tongues of flame suddenly flare up on the walls, and chaos and panic engulf the attackers below. The defenders, full of determination, prepare to intensify the offensive this time. Their aim is directed straight at the enemy's assault towers. The commander ordered to set the siege towers on fire, adding even more flames to the already fierce fortress defense. The assault tower was engulfed in flames. Fire and oil did their work, although it was resistant to black powder. The defender looked at the burning assault tower and said to himself with a bitter smile, hot oil turned out to be better, although black powder failed. Suddenly Tetra appears, a mage, who came as reinforcement to help in the battle. Tetra releases a magical fireball in a counterattack, a loud reminder that she is incredibly powerful in defense. Tetra's magic frightened the soldiers. At first, they thought it was some kind of voodoo shaman. Tetra, with a sparkle in her eyes, enthusiastically explains how the combination of black powder and oil in the magical fire cannon creates a powerful flame. The weapon devours tons of fuel like a giant maw and can explode if the circle of fire magic is stopped. A salvo from the fire cannon burns the enemy siege tower, undermining their assault and destroying the defense. The soldiers are wildly happy. They survived the first day of battle, reinforcements arrived, and they managed to hold the defense. When night fell, the enemy camp quietly surveyed their losses and whispered to themselves, was their attack worth such a price? The wounded during the siege quickly recovered, and some jumped into the moat to survive. Enemy generals whispered, recalling how the fire cannon strike shook the fighting spirit and the price this battle took. During the strategy talk, it emerged that the fortress was surrounded, but the defenders were ready to wear down the attackers. Almas receives a letter with a list of wounded and dead and bitterly reflects on the cost of the defense. Ron radiated optimism. Their army lost fewer, and overall they maintained the advantage. The commanders decided to allow the soldiers to drink a little to somehow support morale during this long night of siege. Burroughs openly praises Tetra and the soldiers for their efforts, and the tension among the defenders slightly eases. The leaders argued whether to stay on alert or finally rest, but eventually agreed to drink cautiously and take turns on guard duty. The night fell quietly, until suddenly an alarm howled. The enemy unexpectedly attacked the fortress. Ron and the group tensely prepare for the approaching enemies, estimating how many there might be, but in the dim light, their silhouettes are barely distinguishable. The night attackers hide in the shadows of the night. Without torches, they quietly sneak up to catch the fortress defenders by surprise. The leaders notice the attackers' strategy. They hide their forces and sow chaos in the darkness of the night. Walking in the dark is difficult, but the attackers do everything to confuse the defenders before the real assault. Suddenly, arrows flew from an ambush, and the defenders unexpectedly found themselves under fire from invisible enemies. Enemy soldiers, crouched under the siege debris, pretend to retreat from the fortress battlefield and try to break out. The defenders, gathering their thoughts and still stunned, only asked, what was the purpose of this noisy, seemingly chaotic night attack on the fortress? The enemies try to break the defenders' spirit. They scare them and constantly harass them during the exhausting watch. The commanders carefully observe the situation, because if the defenders make a mistake, the attackers will swiftly exploit the slightest weakness. They decide to divide their forces. One group repels attacks, the other lets half the soldiers rest. Despite the plan, continuous attacks leave the defenders no moment of peace at night. At dawn, the soldiers wake up. After a good rest, their fighting spirit has risen, and they are full of determination for today's siege battle. The commanders fiercely argued about how long the siege would last until they finally agreed. Under continuous pressure, the fortress must fall within 2 weeks. On the second day, the army resolutely stands behind Alma's Esh, ready to continue the powerful offensive with renewed strength. The second day of the siege approaches the fortress of Tyria. The soldiers barely endure fatigue under the relentless roar of battle. Ron, on the edge of patience from constant distractions, vows to focus despite fatigue and the relentless archers' fire. While Ron fends off attackers, the defenders feel that under enemy pressure the archers' accuracy begins to falter. The command orders to prepare the fire cannon. The defenders believe its flame will turn the tide of battle. The fire cannon fires. The wooden assault tower is instantly engulfed in flames, and chaos ensues among the enemy. Ron rejoiced and celebrated. He burned the siege tower, while the enemies, unsuspecting, meanwhile gather and prepare a second attack. The defender says, "Fire cannons need a pause. Do not look away. Carefully watch the enemy's next move." Ron aggressively encourages the troops, while the garrison looks suspiciously at the enemy's sudden and unusual tactics. Burroughs persistently warns, "Conserve flamethrower ammunition. The enemy's fire mixture is almost impervious to flame." The defenders decided to grasp Tetra's knowledge to break the enemy's strange strategy and dispel that unknown threat. Tetra, without hesitation, suggests removing the magical barrier of the siege tower, and with burning eyes explains how to use the special talisman. She casts Dispel Magic, and the protective barrier around the enemy tower rapidly weakens. Tetra releases a magical projectile. It rushes forward and strikes the now defenseless assault tower with a powerful hit. The tower crashed with a roar and collapsed, shocking both sides and sharply changing the course of the siege battle. The defenders, shocked that the barrier suddenly disappeared, instantly asked Tetra to lead the assault. Enemy soldiers, recognizing Tetra as a voodoo master, rushed to seize her in the midst of battle. Tetra responds lightning fast, skillfully repelling the attackers and impressing with her hand-to-hand combat mastery. The defenders loudly and insistently call Tetra to retreat. The enemy has trapped her, and the siege intensifies. The soldiers, together as one, form a shield around Tetra, covering her from further enemy attacks. Commanders loudly and tensely discuss what threat magic poses on the front line and insist Tetra must be defended at any cost. The western tower is under siege. Soldiers cling to the walls, and enemies climb ladders and shoot arrows. Tetra and Ron anxiously discuss that strange little siege machine that recently appeared on the battlefield. The new siege machine is nothing like the usual towers. It rather resembles a moving battering ram. They rack their brains trying to understand the enemy's change of tactics, puzzled that he abandoned siege towers. The enemy pushes the battering ram forward, preparing to seriously break through the fort's defense. Enemies throw debris from fallen towers into the moat, fill it up, and build a temporary bridge over it. The defenders tremble with excitement. As soon as the moat is filled with debris, the battering ram will rush forward. Fire falls on the battering ram, but its protection turns out to be stronger than siege towers. The defenders are surprised. The roof, slanted like a ram's horn, deflects arrows, and the magical barrier only strengthens it, irritating the archers. Commanders decide to strike the soldiers building the bridge, and the voodooists are in no hurry to come to their aid. The enemy gathers debris from destroyed assault towers and uses it to pave a temporary bridge over the moat. Lulu appears on the front line and, without hesitation, voluntarily joins the plan to stop the battering ram. She prepares to break through the barrier, covering the battering ram, and arranges with Ron the right moment. Ron sharply grabs the explosive spear in his hands, ready to rush at the soldiers, crossing the new bridge made of debris. Lulu begins to sing a spell, clutching magical talismans in her hands and preparing to disrupt the enemy's advance. Lulu focused launches a powerful dispel spell and aims directly at the support of the enemy's makeshift bridge. The explosion tears the bridge apart. Debris and parts of the battering ram crash down with a roar. The defenders burst with joy. The battering ram is destroyed, but they remain alert. Danger is still approaching. Several battering rams are still rushing at the enemy, and despite failures, he still advances forward. Ron leads the defense of the western tower, tense and preparing for another explosive attack. Ron gathers the defenders at the central tower and prepares for a decisive, ruthless counterattack. A messenger hawk arrives bringing news. The first phase of their plan succeeded. The Domwarger military camp spread across the entire valley, tense and preparing for the decisive battle that is about to erupt. Tonino says with a smile that their siege tactics worked. They filled the enemy's moat with debris. Carlo sees Tonino moving forward and, confident of victory, says they will soon capture the western tower. Suddenly Tonino laughs ominously, and his subordinate urgently warns something unexpected and troubling has happened near Carlo. When they learned that the village of Dori on their supply route had fallen, everyone gasped. Supplies are now at risk. Tonino learns that 3,000 Rossis horsemen suddenly captured the village of Dori, and this news tightens the hearts of the camp leaders. They guarded the only road between the kingdoms, and still cannot understand how such a huge force passed unnoticed. They consider other routes but know for sure the mountains are impassable, so only the forest remains. Carlo remembered the whisper that ran through the village, supposedly Alma's Esh, son of Griffin, and perhaps he is leading the enemy cavalry. Tonino says the patrols where weak tension is rising, and it is urgent to stop the enemy's unexpected movement through the forest. The generals and nobles quickly gathered in the tent, while the army relentlessly stormed the fortress. Carlo, with a voice heavy as lead, reported that the village of Dori had fallen. Their supply route was cut off, so he proposed a temporary retreat. Several nobles exploded with rage, rejected the idea of retreat, and accused Baraus of not taking the war seriously. Barras explained that the fate of their family depends on the outcome of the war, and emphasized how important this land is to them. Despite the tension, Carlo quietly but confidently reminded them that retreat would also hurt his chances of becoming the next king. Tonino, agreeing with Barros, decisively rejects the idea of retreat and plans to send troops to recapture the village of Dori. Carlo says the enemy controls only a tiny patch of their land, and this is exactly what gives Damorger the advantage. Although wary, the nobles agreed, sending 4,000 infantrymen and 1,000 horsemen should reclaim the lost village. Carlo, shining with admiration, praises Burros for his leadership and appoints him commander of the mission to recapture the village of Dori. Leading 5,000 soldiers, Barras takes command and resolutely promises to reclaim the village of Dori for Carlos's cause. The army steps into the dangerous Griffin Forest and rushes into the darkness. Ambushes lie in wait here. The soldiers hurry through the forest, their hearts tightening with anxiety for Almes and for comrades fighting deeper in enemy territory. The group with shining eyes enthusiastically discusses the impressive cavalry of Roses, especially the Ash family squad, which has united with the Hermanus people. The cavalry of Almas rides relentlessly and skillfully among its ranks are warriors of the Exodus tribe led by their king. Raymond sincerely admits this is his first time as a leader, so he jokes that he will hand over command to the king of the Exodus tribes. Night creeps in, soldiers anxiously scavenge in search of a hidden, safe corner where they can set up camp without lighting fires. The next morning the army prepares to storm a small border village and give the horses a rest. Soldiers rush through the village streets and suddenly launch an assault. A swift raid overwhelms the enemy. Peaceful residents scatter in panic as Damorger soldiers storm the village, breaking its defenses quickly and decisively. The village elder learned with horror. Rose's soldiers defeated Damorger's troops nearby. The villagers surrender, pleading for mercy and agreeing to raise the rose flag, no longer resisting. Damorger's warriors do not burn the village. The provisions from Dorino village have already been taken. Carlo extends his hand to the village head and begs for mercy and cooperation so that he surrenders peacefully and supports their cause. Rose's cavalry rushes from village to village, storming them and convincing people to lay down arms and raise flags, then moves on. In the village of Dori, the captured leader bitterly informed Damorger's soldiers that they were offered to surrender. The village defenders feel that their infantry will not withstand the pressure of the enemy cavalry, and anxiety begins to spread through their ranks. They hastily close the gates and take positions, tense and ready to stop the approaching enemy cavalry. Rose's cavalry appears on the horizon and, like a storm, rushes swiftly towards the village. Coordinated, agile mounted archers charge into the attack. The defenders vainly try to cope with the accurate shots of the mounted archer shooting from the fortress walls. Even more mounted reinforcements arrive. The pressure increases. The defenders panic. They cannot hit the moving targets. Rose's cavalry has surrounded the fortress. There are so many of them that the ground trembles beneath their feet, and they prepare to unleash a coordinated hail of arrows. Raymond feels a chill of fear at the thought of being surrounded by enemies, but deep in his heart, he knows sooner or later he will have to surrender. The soldiers tense as they push the ballista closer to the fortress walls, preparing to attack the defenders. The ballista operator has already loaded the black powder charges and is tense, preparing for an attack that could break the defense. Raymond orders the ballista team to fire, and so begins the first battle of the Rose cavalry. The ballista volley thundered the fortress gates, shattered into splinters, and immediately a huge breach was formed. The defenders are gripped by panic. As the gates fall, they fear the enemy will break inside at once. Rose's cavalry burst through the destroyed gates, roaring threateningly, and with unwavering determination rushed to storm the fortress. A fierce battle flares up. Both sides clash head-on, mounted riders charge in attack, and the defenders desperately counterattack. Pink soldiers are rushing deeper and deeper inside, sowing chaos, while the invaders flood the fortress. The captain bravely throws himself at the invaders, determined not to let them cross the gates. Raymond looms over the captain with a cold threat. He is forced to surrender, and the weapon reluctantly slips from his hands. Raymond promises mercy to those who surrender, and plainly says, this is his tactical kindness for the sake of strategy. He says that civilians and those who surrender will be spared. They will be encouraged to survive for the sake of their families. The defenders reluctantly lower their weapons, and Rose's troops swear to punish only the true instigators of the war. Rose's army broke into the village of Dora and is now inspecting the last granary after their recent invasion. Captain Raymond ordered Virgil to set fire to the grain storage. He was preparing to deprive the enemy of valuable supplies. Flames greedily consumed the wooden granaries, black smoke rose upwards, and the soldiers silently watched as everything around was destroyed. Rosewold hesitated whether it was worth wasting food, but Raymond chose speed and a chance to survive, rather than burden the marching army. Meanwhile, in the city of pomegranate mines, Run passionately dreamed of joining the battles his family was leading elsewhere. Run grumbled about being left behind and desperately wanted to unleash his lightspeed slash against Almies. The panicked messenger reported in a trembling voice that Rosie's army had captured the village of Dor and moved on with 3,000 soldiers. Run laughed contemptuously, he was sure. His father's news confirmed that Rosie's troops were trapped in Tyre. When he sensed the threat, Run imagined breaking Ross's army to prove he was a skilled strategist. Run, confident in the strength of the citadel, decided to hold the line firmly while calling for reinforcements. Roses's cavalry army suddenly appeared near Braz, and with a swift, coordinated assault broke the defenders' resistance. Roses demanded the surrender of Braz city, claiming he knew about the city's vulnerable, nearly empty garrison. Run realized that Roses had formed alliances and acquired better cavalry. They were charging the assault faster than expected. Despair gripped Run's heart. He counted fewer than 100 soldiers without immediate reinforcements. Defense was impossible. Finally, Braz city surrendered without a fight. Its gates opened before the victorious Rossisi troops surrounding it. The pink soldiers entered the city of Braz, admiring its garnet wealth after the city had easily surrendered. The soldiers loudly celebrated, coming across spices, gold, and glass ornaments while looting the captured city. Virgil sincerely thanked for the chance to serve Rosewold and dreamed of freedom, while the captain meanwhile prioritized collecting official documents above all. In those papers, they listed villages, leaders, and taxes. They valued them above any gold because they provided control. Roses, realizing the role Ryuan played in the administration, decided to make him a useful political hostage. At first, Run refused to become a hostage, proudly exclaiming that the residents of Braz adored him. Rhea targeted the most painful point, the safety of his family, threatened Run, and forced him to reluctantly agree to go with them. That night, the Rose troops were tense as they planned the defense of Braz city and prepared for counterattacks. Amos's allies, upon hearing the news of the Rose's victory, prepared anxiously would they have to reinforce the front. The next morning, the Braz troops rushed to the village of Dora, having heard that the Rossis army had already moved. The Braz commander turned pale and panicked when he realized that the Rasses army was advancing on his territory and threatening his family. He threw all his troops toward Braz city, leaving behind the initial mission to reclaim the village of Dora. In the fortress of Tyria, the Damorger army was shaken by the news. The city of Braz had fallen. The shocking defeat forced the Damorger commanders to immediately convene an emergency meeting to quickly review plans and devise a new course of action. Opinions were divided: to retreat, reinforce the troops, or take a risk and continue the siege with only 3,000 invaders. Carlos calmly gave the order to retreat, and his decisive, strategic move stunned the commanders of the Damorgers. He explained that regrouping would prevent even greater losses, and the council, with pain in their hearts, began preparing to withdraw the troops. Another commander bitterly mourned the retreat, fearing it would bury his reputation and shatter his dreams of a military career. Without delay, they gave the order to recall the scattered troops and request reinforcements from the kingdom's capital. Carlos donned armor for negotiations, while Tolnino swore to cover the army's vulnerable flank. Tolnino himself took on the task of covering the retreat, although he knew well that Almas had previously defeated him in battle. Near the fortress Teria, Tonino swore that during the retreat he would keep Carlos safe and unharmed. Scouts reported the enemies numbered 8,000, so an assault with their tiny detachment was extremely risky. Tonino's flank was ready to give their lives to buy time and allow the main army to retreat. The soldiers pressed against their shields. Enemy bombs were approaching, and they rushed into a desperate defensive maneuver. Explosions devastated the battlefield, throwing soldiers in different directions as enemy bombardments tore through their defensive line. Frightened warriors realized only prayer could save them from the approaching deadly fire. Tonino sharply shouted to the scattered soldiers to gather. The enemy cavalry was rushing straight at their position. Almas led the cavalry into attack, surged forward with steel determination, and stunned the frightened soldiers of Tonino. De Morgan's formation completely fell apart like a house of cards. The soldiers who adopted Tonino's strategy could no longer withstand the relentless force. The flanking detachment of De Morgan suffered devastating losses and fled in retreat from the fortress of Tyria as their fighting spirit and formation completely disintegrated. At the fortress of Tyria, scouts noticed the army of De Morgan retreating. A chance arose for a decisive strategic counterattack. Almas's plan worked. The enemy retreated, and their supply line was left defenseless before the decisive strike. The commanders ordered preparations for the offensive and insisted on caution, no reckless attacks in the upcoming battle. The soldiers prepared. Long fatigue and irritation from constant defense solidified into a firm resolve to soon deliver a counterstrike. Almost relinquishing command, he decided to rush into the front ranks right beside Sakura and his faithful horse. Before the battle, Almas carefully tended to his horse and prepared his comrades, clearly distributing duties for the upcoming fight. Their army stood ready, hearts beating with confidence in their own superiority. They looked the enemy straight in the eyes and did not resort to any deception or trickery. The commanders gave the order to load the ballistae with black powder. They were to break the enemy formation even before the main assault began. When the formation began to collapse, Ron led the soldiers forward, urging them on and ordering not to reduce the pressure. On the flank of De Morgan, panic erupted. Some soldiers abandoned their positions and fled, while the commanders desperately clung to the defensive lines. Halino decisively ordered a tactical retreat, and the right wing was lined up near the forest to better hold the defense. The flank army was preparing to sacrifice the left wing to buy time for the main retreat. On the third day, Almas finally reached the border village where the surviving enemies had gathered. He almost ordered Bartholomew to surround the village, but saw that there were neither supplies nor fortifications there. As soon as the soldiers moved forward, enemy archers suddenly unleashed a volley of arrows that unexpectedly struck the vanguard units. Almas ordered Ron to lead the attack. He wanted to avoid unnecessary casualties during the assault. In the village, unarmed civilians begged for mercy, assuring that the De Morgan soldiers had already left these places. Almas instantly organized a search, tended to the wounded soldiers, and at the same time chased after the enemies who suddenly attacked with arrows. Tonino's group decided to spend the night first to firmly secure the position, and only then to move on. They delivered supplies and arrows previously gathered by the construction team so they could hold out until morning. Tonino erected wooden barricades to hide from attacks from the sky, but they proved useless against gunpowder weapons. Intelligence reported the enemy had already barricaded themselves in the second village, and the defense was ready even before Almas's arrival. They almost decided to abandon the night attack and spend the night in the camp until dawn to avoid losses. Tonino's troops finally reached the village of Doris intact and unharmed, all thanks to cautious plans and coordinated retreat. On the fourth day, Tonino returned again to the ranks of the main De Morgan army. They met him with relief and sincere respect. Tonino returned alive but paid a heavy price, and this made them value that at least one soldier survived. He immediately called the officers to report on the situation. It was necessary to quickly understand what was happening on the battlefield. The reports sadly spoke of destroyed fortifications, burned supplies, and thinned ranks. Their army had decreased to 15,000. Bruce returned to the city and did not even respond to orders. This worried everyone and sowed doubts. Suddenly, Tonino received urgent news. King De Morgan finally sent the long-awaited response to their request. Tonino was ordered to hold out for 3 days, but everyone feared their forces would not endure. He almost did not doubt the enemy was unlikely to dare a direct attack, so he decided to wait for the return of Bross's army. Both sides held their breath and tensely guessed who would reach the door first, reinforcements or enemies. Almas gladly and sincerely praised the horse Sakura for enduring the campaign, and then met again with Burrows and Tetra. Burrows persistently proposed to capture the village of Dori, but Almas preferred to wait until the entire army returned. Almas allowed the troops to rest and have fun, and this, like a breath of fresh air, lifted their fighting spirit after exhausting recent battles. In Browse City, Raymond found himself face to face with Rune and put his family at stake in tense negotiations. Run refused to surrender, so Raymond immediately began preparing for battle to retrieve the hostage. Raymond rallied his soldiers and decisively ordered preparations for battle against the enemy general. Just before the clash, enemy cavalry suddenly charged, and Browse had to instantly counterattack. Browse ordered the cavalry to rush forward to intercept the enemy. He was expecting a direct cavalry fight. Mudio gladly accepted the frontal clash, confident he could take advantage of the situation against Browse's advancing rider. Mudio declared with a challenge that his riders were skilled archers, endowed with the blessing of the wind spirit. His archers struck first. Their arrows tore through Browse's ranks and inflicted losses on the advancing cavalry. Pretending to retreat, Mudio cunningly withdrew his forces and set a trap for the pursuer Browse. Then Browse ordered to fall back so that their formation would not collapse under the enemy's pressure. During the retreat, the enemy cavalry mockingly teased them, inciting clashes and igniting personal vendettas. Confident that the enemy archers were weak, Browse's cavalry rushed in pursuit to destroy them before the retreat. Mudio sensed their aggression in advance. He knew, as soon as they got closer, they would rush into pursuit, even though they knew about the trap. When the enemy approached closer, Mudio gave the signal. His troops charged into a counterattack and surrounded them. Browse's forces realized too late the enemy horsemen had already encircled them from all sides. From the flank, another enemy army was advancing on us. The ring was tightening, nowhere left to retreat. 3 places stood on the brink of battle. The troops lined up in strategic positions, and each side, holding their breath, cautiously awaited the other's move. At the captain's order, Vilger's detachment froze in place, covering Musio with a dense wall in the heat of the tense confrontation. From the height, the soldiers saw how the enemy cavalry broke into parts. Raymond's strategy shattered their initial formation. The troops sensed the threat of the kingdom of Rosie's cavalry, rushed to prepare the defense, and at the same time steadfastly believed in the power of Rhea and Vilger. Signal flare shot upward like an explosion of light, giving Rosewald's squad the sign to move forward. Thus began the long-awaited maneuver on the battlefield. Rosewald led the cavalry in the assault. The soldiers surged forward, roaring, while the defenders tensed to cover the vulnerable flanks. Vilger rushed ahead, breaking his way through the soldiers blocking the road, and shouted to Rhea, "Go forward." Rhea and Vilger moved as when their strikes stunned the enemy soldiers, while Rosewald watched nearby with a quiet, confident smile. On horseback, Rhea decisively swung her weapon and knocked down an enemy amid the chaotic skirmish. Rosewald's squad followed relentlessly, cavalry and infantry breaking into the disoriented enemies, shattering their defense with unrelenting pressure. The cavalry crashed into the infantry with shields, and chaotic clashes immediately erupted. Soldiers raised their shields and braced to withstand the onslaught. Enemy ranks wavered under the pressure, horses trampled the lines, soldiers fell, and the entire battlefield was engulfed in chaos. A sudden fall knocked a horse from under its rider, and soldiers screamed in panic as the attack began to falter. Bodies and horses tore toward the skies, and Raz's chaotic army completely lost control of the formation. Rosewald calmly surveyed the situation, noticed the enemy's inexperience, while his troops advanced disciplinedly in a tactical offensive. Panic gripped the enemy, Rose's soldiers fled, and Rosewald urged Vilger forward to take advantage of the chaos. Rhea with the cavalry rushed forward, and under relentless tactical pressure, Braz's army formation simply fell apart. Panic gripped Braz when he realized that his troops in heavy armor were surrounded and scattered by attacks from several sides. The enemy infantry fled in terror as soon as the cavalry crashed down on them, and Braz boiled with rage at their cowardice. Braz, enraged and desperate, charged forward himself, promising to fight despite the chaos in his army. A mighty knight rose before them and blocked the way. Rosewald ordered Rhea and Vilger to retreat. Braz appeared and immediately challenged Rosewald one-on-one, threatening to cleave him in a duel. Rosewald faced Braz head-on and struck fiercely. Their swords clashed amid the swirling chaos of the battlefield. With one decisive blow, Rosewald knocked Braz off his horse. The general fell to the ground in the middle of the battlefield. Braz barely got to his feet, faced to Rosewald's spear, and Rosewald coldly warned him, "Do not make a single reckless move." On the 4th morning, victory was joyfully announced. Braz and his son were taken alive. Raymond's detachment returned triumphantly. The soldiers shouted joyfully, and the commander proudly led his victorious fighters through the camp. Raymond humbly whispered, "Thank you," to Rosewald and Musio, and his son sincerely praised him for the success. Almas glanced at the loot, and the prisoners confirmed the entire Braz family was captured. Not broken even in captivity, Braz warned that his brother and son would one day take revenge. Almas felt the final battle approaching, measured the enemy's strength, and knew that the family was still under his control. In Domorger's camp, soldiers fled one after another, while Almis's troops prepared for the decisive battle. Palanino was called to a strategic meeting. It instantly became clear that their position was worsening and urgent decisions were needed. The memory of past retreats overwhelmed him, and he suddenly realized that it was Carlo's orders that had saved their forces from total destruction back then. At the military council, Carlo addressed the gathered commanders, preparing them for the critical battle ahead. Surrounded by stern faces, the young commander entered the hall and felt the tension gripping each of the present leaders. Carlos's faction waited inside, and when Tonino joined them, he felt it clearly. Political disagreements could undermine their unity before the advancing enemy. Informants confirmed, only 15,000 soldiers remained, facing 13,000 enemies' forces nearly equal. The commander challenged everyone in the hall, demanding plans to defeat Rossi's advancing army, though the chances were very slim. Silence fell. Everyone felt the truth. Hope alone would not replace a clear plan for victory. Losses kept growing, so Carlo proposed surrender. He feared that if the fight continued, everything would collapse. Rada, though with a heavy heart, agreed. There was no longer any strategy that could overturn Rossi's advantageous position and his relentless offensives. Damorger's army sent a messenger, and Almas, offering no resistance, accepted the truce. On the fourth night, near the village of Doris, in the lands under Rossi's control, negotiations were being prepared. Almas firmly decided to defend his side. He knew well that his opponent was a powerful prince. Carlo entered the negotiation tent and greeted politely. Almas was already sitting opposite at the table. Both leaders quietly exchanged restrained words and acknowledged that the tension between their kingdoms needed to be resolved. Carlo proposed a one-year truce to gain a year of peace, but he did not give up his southern ambitions. Almas agreed, understanding that a prolonged war would yield nothing without the necessary means to take fortifications. Then Carlo sharply declared the territory of Browse would be given entirely as compensation for the war. Almas froze at Carlo's proposal, but immediately felt how difficult it would be to defend this territory. He sharply reduced his claims to just western Browse, and instead of extra land asked for real master blacksmiths. Carlo nodded. It became clear to him. Knowledge and human strength weigh more than uncontrolled lands. Almas proposed taking ransom for the captured members of the Browse family, a way to earn money, and at the same time bring benefit to both kingdoms. Finally, Almas asked Carlo to stay in his kingdom until the official agreement is signed. Almas confidently finished his proposal. Carlo shuddered with surprise. His ability to anticipate moves and cautious approach in negotiations were impressive. Carlos acknowledged Almas's cunning, and Almas modestly reminded that he is the future claimant to the throne. The meeting ended, and Almas's allies joyfully celebrated the truce, considering it a great victory. He swore to seize the throne and protect Uryu, because the safety of the family was above all for him. His ambitions knew no bounds. He sought to protect allies and orphans, to unite everyone under his future rule. Carlo felt the approach of a brutal civil war in his chest. It would demand recognition from all nobles, even from Bella. The Dable faction could be crushed, but the price would be the ruins of the kingdom and open doors for enemies. He almost felt that the true victory was to preserve lives, minimize losses, to protect the weakened kingdom from foreign predators. The recent victory over Damorger gave Almas a chance and a serious reason to strike first. Without wasting time, Resis's troops rushed home, preparing to face the looming internal battle with Abel. After days of relentless marching, the troops returned to the Ashlands. Here they were warmly welcomed by the peasants who had been waiting. Though exhausted, the leader insisted on haste because he knew their mission still required swift action against looming threats. He deployed 1,000 soldiers around the settlement so that it would remain safe while the campaign continued. At the meeting with Muzio, the general hesitated, whether it was wiser to return home right now than to stay here any longer. The general hinted mysteriously and promised to reveal something intriguing if they delayed a little. The army marched through the lands of Esha, not stopping for a moment, and by the next day reached the capital of Rose. Crowds poured into the streets, loudly chanting. The celebration was even wilder than after their previous victory over King Firm. Their victory over a stronger enemy elevated Almas's glory and ignited passionate admiration among the inhabitants of Rosa. Realizing how important the people's support was, Almas raised his voice and called his troops. Let everyone see their proud might. In the very heart of the inner castle Rosasis, orders thundered. Roles were assigned, and they watched closely to ensure future plans went flawlessly. People in power greeted Almas, showering him with praise for the brilliant victory and openly admitting, it was he who repelled Damorger's forces. Impatient allies kept interfering and interrupting, but his escort insisted on rushing to the king. The matter was too urgent to delay. He walked alongside his comrades, silently enduring the mockery about political enemies and going deeper into the Fortress of Roses. At the threshold of the audience hall, Almaz announced that he had returned, and the king's close associates warmly greeted him. In the magnificent hall, Almaz solemnly walked to the throne, and the courtiers on both sides stood frozen in respectful silence. The companions stood nearby, holding their breath, tensely watching as the decisive exchange of words with the king began. The king generously praised Amos for his achievements, and this wave of approval prompted him to immediately ask for both Princess Yuria and the royal throne. His audacious demand instantly stunned the audience, while Yuria silently maintained her calm and awaited the king's response. The king gave more than was asked. He extended the throne to Yuria and another unknown gift. Filled with admiration, Almaz and Yuria met again in the hall and reached out to each other, joyfully celebrating. I accidentally pressed Yuria to myself and kissed Hera's, if sealing our alliance before the watchful eyes of the crowd. He promised never to let her go, and Yuria, without hesitation for a moment, accepted this promise. Putting on the crown, Almaz raised the royal scepter. The people erupted with shouts of loyalty. Holding hands with Yuria, he stepped forward, and the citizens loudly chanted the name of their new king. Almaz in one word silenced the celebration, reminding everyone that the war continues and victory has not yet been achieved. Almaz decisively declared that the enemies are still hiding in the kingdom and ordered to bring Prince Carlo. Suddenly Carlo appeared and named influential aristocrats suspected of aiding the enemies one by one. The last on the list was Diable. Based on Carlos's testimony and evidence, everyone was accused of treason. The revelation stunned the court, and sharp questions immediately flared up: how to deal with such high-profile suspected traitors. Almaz decided that execution was the only way out, and without any hesitation ordered to eliminate all identified merchants. The guards quickly subdued the accused nobles and strictly ordered them to surrender without resistance during the arrest. Chaos broke out in the hall. Soldiers subdued the suspects, while Almaz watched from the throne. Almaz challenged the assembly, questioned their loyalty, and directly asked if there were any objections to his coronation or rule. Meeting no resistance, he decisively declared that removing all traitors would become his next priority. The commanders reported Almaz threw all forces into battle to eliminate the 9,000 enemies who were here. And Almaz resolutely said that he himself would lead the remaining forces to defeat Regardable. Then he again strengthened alliances with loyal comrades so that they would continue to stand for him under his rule. They swore to fight side by side because they felt the campaign against their enemies was still far from over. Almaz long tormented himself with thoughts about his decision, knowing it would haunt him, but still considered it necessary. Almaz ordered the army to be divided into 3 divisions and threw them into the territory of the Dible faction to completely suppress it. The military stormed into the building, shouting to civilians, "Stop," and simultaneously combing every corner of the territory. By the king's order, the troops arrested everyone inside and were already preparing to move to the next target. In the Dable fort, the refugees froze in despair, not knowing whether their leader would protect them or abandon them. Bartololo gathered his soldiers, shouted that the people in the barricaded fortress were merchants, and immediately ordered an assault. The Rose's army moved to the Dable estate and suddenly overwhelmed the defenders with their sudden, coordinated offensive. Commander Ron's soldiers surrounded the mansion in a tight ring, cut off all escape routes, and took full tactical advantage. By Almaz's order, they pretended to wait while watching carefully so that Argar would have no escape routes left. Inside, Arjigar exploded with rage and hotly reproached Gilbert. "Why did you gather troops here instead of helping in the previous battles?" Regard exposed allies who sided with Almaz and angrily called them cowards who betrayed him for their own survival. Rigor angrily attributed their weakness to exhaustion and ordered Gilbert to gather the rest of the available army. Gilbert agreed to take the task in public, but in his heart considered Rigor hopeless. Saving him was impossible and advised. The advisor suggested calming Almaz with mercy, while Gilbert stubbornly insisted on regrouping his last soldiers. Meanwhile, Almaz's main army was advancing on the city. Chances for peace for both sides were melting before their eyes. It was almost decided that one faction must fall. They believed that Rigor's survival would threaten the Ash faction. A woman fervently begged Almaz not to forget that there were innocents among the members of the Diable faction. Almaz assured her that he would not kill everyone, but refusing all executions could sooner or later lead to a rebellion. He decided to punish everyone who refused to take up arms and defend the kingdom during the war. If If nobles or their relatives were forced by political or family pressure, they might be given an exception. Alma's promised to spare civilians but swore he would not forgive those who resisted his army. Almas revealed the truth. Half of the testimonies used to spare certain people were deliberately fabricated. A genuine letter with the plan of the uprising did exist, but the authorities mostly dismissed it, not considering it substantial evidence. Almas assured that his chosen strategy would indeed minimize casualties, and at the same time, reliably protect the kingdom. The next morning, while twilight still prevailed, the arrival of Almes was announced. Troops gathered near the battlefield. Standing before the assembled soldiers and allies, Almas was ready to move forward. His planned decisive actions turned out to be a mistake. Ron reported, "The area is surrounded. He has driven the members of the Rhaegar faction into their own homes." Almas gave the order to his army to rush to the mansion. He was confident in his numerical superiority. When the troops charged the attack, a sudden commotion stopped them just a few steps from the gates of the fortified estate. Unexpectedly, the defenders opened the gates. Almas's troops, who were watching, froze in confusion. Suddenly, soldiers with white flags appeared. They betrayed Rhaegar, who fiercely accused Gilbert of treason. Rhaegar was forcibly displayed as a prisoner, and his allies surrendered without giving any real battle. Gilbert approached Almas, sharply renounced loyalty to Rhaegar, and swore to serve only Almas, although they were relatives. Almas recognized Gilbert and sharply asked about his intentions, while Rhaegar from captivity burst out in fierce protest. Gilbert assured King Rosie of his loyalty, recalled old meetings, and how it seemed to him that the king himself noticed him. Suddenly, Alma ordered Ron to arrest Gilbert, and Ron, stunned, sharply demanded explanations. Ron tirelessly reminded Gilbert of the numerous crimes committed under Rhaegar, persistently pointing out that this contradicted his supposed loyalty to Almas. Almas asked Gilbert to stand up, and Gilbert stubbornly insisted that it was not his fault. Rhaegar told Almas that their meeting happened under unfortunate circumstances and firmly assured that he never truly hated him. Alma pronounced the verdict execution, decisively saying that their rivalry and conflict over Yuria could not continue. Rhaegar fell into a low bow, desperately begging to spare his life, and Almas sighed and considered his request. He almost gave the order to arrest and imprison Rhaegar, hinting to him to beg for mercy for the sake of his family's safety. Yuria found herself face to face with the captured Rhaegar, and this put an end to their struggle with the Debil faction. Abdamus called Yuri to return with him, but Tetra instantly intervened and corrected what he had inadvertently said. The three decided to go home together, and for a moment they were overwhelmed with relief after the conflict. Suddenly, laughter burst out from the crowd and stopped them in their tracks. Almas and Tetra looked around to see where it was coming from. Almas and Yuria caught mocking voices and suddenly realized their language, through magical blessing, was the same as her own. Almas warned danger was approaching, so he urged his comrades to be on alert in case of sudden threat. Rhaegar was suddenly attacked, and in a shock fit, blood gushed from his mouth like a fountain. Chaos erupted around Yuria, and she tried with all her might to understand the sudden events rapidly unfolding around her. The narrator introduced Sami, an officer who recorded the entire 7-day war in the chronicles. Rhaegar died from a rare disease that caused blood to flow from all the body's orifices, thus ending the 7 days' war. Returning to the Rosite palace, he almost went out before the crowd to loudly declare himself the heir. Despite the loud announcement, he quietly clarified, officially he was not yet king because the conditions were not met. Not being married to Yuria, he remained without inheritance rights. A strict tradition denied him until the gods blessed him and he underwent purification rites. While preparing the wedding and ceremony, his heart was constricted by the thought that an official coronation awaited afterward. When the nobility gathered for congratulations, he was busy with duties and kept marveling at how Rasichi managed to attract so much attention. Having almost overcome the growing threats and, as if by itself, proven his strength, he began to attract more and more attention from all the kingdoms. Delegates came and almost entrusted Burrows with the task, while behind them royal guests were still waiting. Though tired, he continued to receive guests, planning to meet others after the ceremonies ended. King Exius and his queen hurriedly arrived and sincerely greeted the new ruler of Rasexa. Seeing Almos's value, Exius, with a gleam in his voice, praised their alliance and asked to restore relations after their help in the war. An alarming message arrived. Rossi, the great northern kingdom, sent a convoy to Rossisai. Although the emissary's visit was informal, he almost let them inside, unwilling to delay any longer. A mysterious woman, leading Rosie Envoy, entered the royal hall and politely greeted Elmos. Her confident posture unsettled Almos and left a deep impression, although her diplomatic role was quite limited. Soon, almost immediately, he was called to the palace for the long-awaited wedding and grand coronation. Almost and Yuria joyfully reunited, their faces shining with warmth as they prepared for the sacred ritual. Dressed in white, Yuria shone with beauty, and she was almost praised without any hesitation or distraction. Holding hands, they stepped forward together before the gathered audience in the ceremonial hall. Surrounded by relatives and noble guests, they were sincerely and warmly welcomed when the ceremony officially began. They were almost called to the altar. They stood next to Yuri, ready to complete their royal union. Tetra stepped forward to conduct the ritual. She was chosen both by rank and because she was very close to them. Solemnly, she asked them to swear to support each other in everything that lay ahead. The ceremony continued. The sacred ring was almost ready, and the gods were called to be witnesses. Blessings resounded above them, pleas to the heavens for protection and for a long life together as husband and wife. The ritual ended with the kiss of the vow, the final seal that bound their union. Moved to tears, Yuri embraced him almost tightly, and both promised to stay together forever. When their kiss sealed the marriage, the crowd under the palace's sacred hall erupted in applause. Though officially married, Almos and Yuri knew one last matter remained before them, and only after it could they finally truly rest. He almost asked everyone to look away from you while you nervously prepared for the final public ceremony. The spectators fell silent as the priests lit torches, preparing for Almos's solemn ascent to the throne. Masked actors reenacted the beheading of an ancient king, a cruel symbol of the invasion from the past of Rosidi. The audience sat in confusion until Ainz revealed a tradition whose roots reach into the royal history of Adelmia. The masked figure was a symbol of the invaders, and the performance glorified the vengeful rise of the first king. He almost burst in to dramatically overthrow the invader, as if reenacting the triumph of the first king centuries ago. The ceremony ended almost on its knees. It was a gesture signifying the revival of Rositsu through leadership, lineage, and shared memory. He stood before gods and people almost proudly and announced his ascension to the throne as the 20th Tsar. After the ceremony, he almost whispered thank you to his comrades, officially assuming the role of the new king of Rosidi. Urias shone with joy at that moment, but almost reminded them that their duties and responsibilities had just begun. Suddenly chaos erupted in the hall. A great creature appeared behind Alma. To everyone's surprise, a dead deer was suddenly thrown into the central aisle. As if from nowhere, a griffin appeared before everyone and presented him with the deer, a gift for the coronation. The mighty griffin descended onto the city square. A real commotion arose in the gathered crowd. People whispered and spread rumors when the identity of Almost was finally confirmed. Griffin's son, who had not been believed before, was now revealed. Griffin doubted human customs, was confused in relationships, but sincerely respected Alma's as that central figure. Before leaving, Griffin praised Alma's determination and insisted that everyone lend a hand as soon as he began to hesitate. Suddenly Griffin, as if struck by lightning, recognized the figure in the cloak, Ethel's wife, who came from 5 centuries ago. Whispers spread around when people realized that the mysterious woman had lived more than 500 years ago. It turned out that she was Melon. She was the premier of Rosal and the originator of voodoo magic herself. Although she looked young, she once killed Ethel, the king conqueror who led the bloody invasion. Taking wine as a farewell, Griffin reminded them to visit the forest. He left, and his team, as if almost acknowledging a fatherly role in him, began to clean the palace courtyard. He almost revealed that he doubted his role, but King Razate called him to talk and quietly reassured him. At dinner, Almaz asked if King Razidi regretted the purge, and suddenly a heavy silence fell in the hall. He almost confessed guilt, but insisted that he acted out of necessity. He still considered Rosti an idealist and too soft. Rosti insisted mercilessly, only total purges will eliminate the risk. Fermi's failure and Tetra's betrayal were the best proof for him. Although there were disagreements between them, he almost declared that he sought to end the war and peacefully unite the entire continent. King Razadi acknowledged Almaz's dream, and with a heavy heart realized that his time as ruler was over. Just as he was about to express his hopes, Rosti suddenly clutched his chest and fell, unable to finish the sentence. He screamed in horror when Rosti fainted, and the attendants immediately rushed to help the fallen king. Later, Rosti woke up in bed, and Yuria was stunned by shock at his incredible return. She recounted how she woke up in the middle of a blooming field, saw a figure on the other side of the river, and only then regained consciousness. In the vision, Rosti saw his late wife. She, with a plea in her eyes, begged him to return. Something remained unfinished. Revived again, Rosti decided to fully enjoy his last years, awaiting the birth of his first grandson. Barely recalling the heir, Yuria coquettishly replied, hinting that she was ready without hesitation to conceive their child. He could not hide his anxiety over Rigger's death, and Yuria quietly explained that it happened due to magical backlash. Yuria revealed her power and let it witness that moment clear but uncontrollable. She told that the fairies gave her a blessing, but its hidden consequences remained a mystery for a long time until recently. That mysterious voice that sounded during the blessing resurfaced in her memory, and she did not know if it was a sign of danger. The more people learned about it, the heavier the burden of the blessing became. The loss of support painfully resonated and led to physical exhaustion. She almost thought about other hidden effects, but Yuria honestly admitted due to limitations she could not detect anything else. He recalled his path, the war, endless training, and his own changes, believing that his skill was the fruit of hard-earned growth. He almost confessed to his cruel past war to purges and killings, but there was no repentance, and it troubled him to the core. He asked himself whether these feelings were born from the blessing, and whether it influenced his decisions. He almost wondered, does having more followers really make the blessing stronger, and does it subconsciously shape behavior? Yuria suddenly saw clearly. As soon as she understood the effect, her seal disintegrate. They felt that the blessing was manipulating them, and with the burden of sorrow admitted, to resist it or change its nature was beyond their power. Even barely perceptible blessings quietly influence thoughts, and unintended wishes sometimes turn into death. No one expected this, but he almost said that he would protect life even when others called for total destruction. He reminded Yuria, among his supporters, there are also those who equally value saving others. It seemed he was almost standing confidently, believing that his vision coincides with the path his people are already following. He felt it clearly. The next step is to select loyal comrades who would embody his ideals. He almost insisted that they set aside all other matters and only create the necessary mood. Yuria responded warmly, accepted his courtship, and asked him to be gentle and careful. When the couple spent the night together for the first time, their intimacy deepened, filled with confidence and trust. Elsewhere, others noticed. Their night had begun and decided simply not to interfere. On the 5th day of the 7-day war, the Allied cavalry rushed westward, galloping across open plains. Thanks to the insect-like scout, their commanders clearly saw how the resistance of Dalmorger was falling apart before their eyes. On the wings of flying creatures, the Mealing squad tracked enemy movements and relayed news beyond Adelina's northern border. After Dalmorger's defeat in the north, the generals hotly debated whether to immediately launch an offensive through the weakened borders. Fearing that after the fall of Teria the country would be torn apart by civil war, they did not attack and only closely monitored Dalmorger. Melon, shrouded in mystery, coldly and confidently reminded them it was she who raised the first king and his loyal circle. After saying goodbye to the king, Mealing gracefully withdrew to immerse herself in some personal and still unknown research and duties. The soldiers whispered in admiration and fussed. They looked young, but had lived and served for centuries without aging. Arriving home, she activated the entrance, and suddenly secret stairs leading underground opened before her. In her vast sanctuary, Mealing settled down, once again ready for tea and solitary magical research. While pouring tea, she quietly confessed. Her research was already 90 complete, and a powerful breakthrough was imminent. She finally unlocked the fruit of many decades of effort, the magical blessing of partial immortality. Her body shone with perfection and healed instantly, but death still lurked. It would take complete destruction to end her. Though she was immortal, Mealing confessed regret. 500 years of hardship weighed on her will. Driven by a single goal, she desired not eternal life, but magic so powerful it could challenge the gods. Mealing was tormented by the question, would immortality bring peace, or would it turn into something far more dangerous? She dreaded the thought that immortality could become an eternal nightmare, so she vowed never to die like Ethel. She no longer had any doubts, to resurrect Ethel and return to their homeland, no matter the cost. Mealing suddenly recognized a familiar soul in Almas and waved it off. He was not a threat to Rosal. Although his common origin was alluring, Mealing mockingly laughed at those who feared to storm the boundaries with forbidden experiments. Kurosaki Mari, confident and always calculating, silently swallowed her tea, running her plans through her mind. Somewhere in the Razis sect, Almas calmly relaxed in a remote mountain hot spring. He savored the hydrogen sulfide water and the view, allowing the relaxing atmosphere of the hot spring to envelop him. Nearby, 2 girls were also bathing, luxuriating in the warmth and savoring the peace after a long journey. They agreed that the comfort of that spring had settled into their souls, so from then on, whenever they could, they returned for that peace. The group was lively discussing local customs, and noticed with surprise that Adeline rarely washed due to long distances and travel customs. Yuria enthusiastically proposed to arrange accessible hot springs, and Alma's froze. He was tormented by thoughts about expenses and how to organize it all. They gently reminded Alma's that as king, he sometimes deserved a little luxury, especially when taxes were rising. Almas trembled at the thought of noble interference. He feared that land distribution would again strengthen factions like Debel's. Centralization moved slowly, but they honestly admitted some reforms would require decisive steps and years of persistent work. Yuri, quoting his father's words, looked at Almas and quietly but firmly asked if he really intended to unite Adelania. Almas recalled the former king's desire and, gathering his will, resolutely explained that unification depended on how strong the kingdom became. At first, he conceived a simple plan: to tax every piece of land and step by step undermine the power of the nobility. He explained that by giving power to the people, we could balance and restrain the influence of the aristocrats. He sincerely believed, someday, when coins and power fall into the hands of the people, they themselves will raise their voices and demand their rights. They agreed that the political interest of the people would inevitably flourish as soon as prosperity and a sense of their own strength took root in their lives. Almas passionately insisted that minting coins and democratic influence, step by step, would nourish lasting unity during the slow civil transition. To dispel the heavy mood, one girl playfully interrupted the conversation and cheerfully reminded that the trip was for rest. Almas nodded, acknowledged that she was right, and firmly added, the next ruler must be chosen honestly. Tetra spoke up and, placing the unity of the kingdom above all, proposed the child of Urias, as ere the others gratefully accepted her arguments. After a heartfelt conversation, the three settled by the spring, caught their breath, and planned the future of the kingdom. Almos received a letter from King Nadmir. Burrows brought it with a worried face and a palpable urgency. The letter revealed a wedding in the kingdom of Exes and almost proved that it was connected to Mutsail. The purge succeeded, but the lingering resentment shook our balance. We almost decided not to intervene and to trust others. Almost chose diplomacy instead of internal actions from now on his main task, to strengthen relations with other countries. He carefully studied the map around Rydal stretched 4 kingdoms, and Exes had already become an ally. The rise of Ratashi raised alarm in the southern kingdoms, and Almos noticed Burweld and Ebial the next an immediate threat. Almos's secret instilled fear in neighboring kingdoms, and the alliance could completely cut off Ridisha. Almos was preparing his first diplomatic visit to Exes. It was a gesture of loyalty to an ally and a clear hint at serious strategic intentions. This visit is a clear sign of diplomatic return. Previously they had overdone it, so now Almos himself will go. Raymond joined Almos through the Alma Ridge. Their journey began with sincere mutual respect and a common goal. Almos agreed to Raymond's request to speak with him simply. Ruzu was entrusted to closely guard Yuri. She and Almos arrived at the surplus capital. The area was windy and sparsely forested. In the Alma's castle, he repeated to himself as if by command, not to make empty promises during negotiations with King Exo. He greeted King Exes and Mutsail almost formally, but when Mutsail stood nearby, trust came much easier. King Exes gladly accepted the terms of profit sharing, sensing his chance. He still remained cautious about the economic balance in the alliance. Prince Madel solemnly greeted Alma, and the rest of the royal family began to introduce themselves one by one. Madel confirmed that his mother recovered thanks to Urea, and almost sincerely sighed with relief upon hearing this news. He felt that the curse of Prince Ladus was connected, as if it grew out of rivalry between the consort families. Musio joyfully rushed to greet Almos. While Ladus stood a little aside, it was clear how awkward he felt that the first royal greeting went to Musio. He barely noticed how Ladus was intently watching Mutse. Suspicions sharpened Ladus might be involved in that veil. Musio, filled with pride and confidence, introduced his fiancée Rakvilla to Almos. Raquel apologized for not being there earlier and confessed. At that time, her condition did not allow her to properly introduce herself. He almost told her that she was beautiful, and this awakened slight jealousy in his companion Tetra. She stood nearby and watched. Tetra barked at him for that remark. Musio instantly shifted the conversation to preparations for the ceremony and the task. Mutsuo swiftly finished the introductions, left Almos behind, and together with Raquilla exited even before the questions could continue. Finally, Almos greeted Prince Ladus, who responded politely but distantly, with an empty expression on his face. Ladus hastily apologized and stepped away, and Almos and Tetra, sensing his detachment, called him the most mysterious. The first day of the wedding began. Mutsuo welcomed Almos warmly and conducted negotiations easily, not at all like his father. Soon a grand banquet was arranged, and the guests, including him and Tetra, gladly ate generous portions of juicy roasted lamb. On the second day, Matsuo warmly thanked Ruzio their long-standing alliance, dated back to the first negotiations. The wedding ceremony began solemnly. Raquilla sat next to Muzio, and the guests fell silent in respectful quiet. I almost thought it was not a real ceremony. The true vow was only spoken at the finale. He handed Muzio wine from Rizio and blessed him and Raquilla with peace and prosperity. On the last day, Almo sincerely congratulated them, and Tetra drew his attention to something. Yuria explained the ritual, the sacred sacrifice, a sheep offered to the gods of excess and the ancestors. Under the gaze of the entire tribe, Matsuo and Raquilla pledged to each other thus solemnly and sacredly concluding their wedding ceremony. Yuri was about to visit the third concubine, almost deciding to stay another day. When the wedding quieted down, he almost got up to leave and again sank into thoughts about diplomatic affairs. Diplomatic negotiations began. Elmos and Raymond sat opposite King Ixaz and Prince Matal at the negotiation table. The meeting once again confirmed old agreements. Almos and Ixaz firmly shook hands, thereby strengthening political trust between the kingdoms. King Almos and Raymond step into the capital of the Exist tribe, and immediately a local guide appears before them. The alliance meeting begins almost without demands, only a quiet hope that everything will go smoothly and we will understand each other without conflicts. After brief greetings, Almos, Matal, and the leader of X's solemnly opened negotiations between the two growing countries. Sincerely grateful for the cavalry support in the previous war, barely restraining himself from praising the warriors of Exes for their decisive power. He offers a trade wool and horses. Exes in response gives materials from rare animals. Negotiations slowly and confidently move forward. Exist asks for wheat, wine, and any surplus and almost asks, what else do they really need? To everyone's surprise, Exes demands not only iron tools and diplomacy, she puts forward strange and weighty requests. Exes rummages in search of iron to prepare for war and for the fields, and with horror realizes that there is almost none in Razaza. Almost suggests sending blacksmiths instead of tools, as if wanting to repay past help, but not wanting to spend extra resources. Axis agrees, and both sides actively prepare for the exchange of knowledge. Training begins with ironworking, so it is useful for both. Suddenly, the leader of Axis sharply changes the subject and asks Almos to openly say what he thinks about the mysterious object. Nadal raises a pink, gem-like stone and seems intrigued as she examines it, as soon as she is given permission. Almost understands that it is rock salt. Mythil explains that it is from Axis, freshly extracted from underground. Suddenly it dawns on him, Axis exports rock salt, and if prices fall, Razes' economy could suffer greatly. IXIS has no technology for extraction at all, so the leader asks for almost all his help to extract and process the resource. Ixis, with a sparkle in his eyes, offers to sell rock salt cheaply and is already starting to estimate the profit from reselling via the Curitian trade route. Almost questioned that indirect proposal. Ixis says hostile tribes block trade with the Curitians, and that is why Razes' help is needed. Middle admits their tribe lacks trading skills, so they rely on Razesa. She reliably handles affairs with foreigners. Almost mirrors. Ixis seeks only the bare essentials: wheat and wine, no luxury and nothing that could destabilize the economy. Accepting the deal is almost agreeing to support the plan and immediately dive into serious negotiations about an alliance. Magic combed through the consort's chambers and replied, there is no ancient curse here. Attention is now focused on Rachel's marriage. Everyone asks whether ancient curses affected her union. Yuri confesses she and Mitsu are relatives by royal blood, and this unsettles the political balance and ignites their hearts. Minil pieced together family ties bit by bit, and when powers shifted, the fear of internal danger awoke in her again. Though somewhat worried, they assure, peace reigns between the spouses. Tension is under control, but has not disappeared at all. The women whisper, casting glances. The second concubine is so indifferent she avoids quarrels and quietly refuses her claims. Though he is respected as a warrior, the father chooses peace and does not interfere in political power struggles. Instead of siding with bloodline, he took the side of Prince Matal. Tribal unity was more precious to him than anything when threats like lupus loomed. For us, succession is a matter of tradition. The firstborn, by custom, takes everything, and what the elder truly thinks no one knows. It is Prince Lados himself, who was once kind, now mocking Matal, and Mutsu. His transformation sows quiet, trembling unease and cold fear. In his room, Lados tightly clutches a photo of Rachel. His soul is eaten away by grief and jealousy toward Mazel. He cannot forget how he was declared the future king, but all his heart desired was only one thing: to be near Rachel. Suddenly, a mysterious woman appears in the room. Lados hears her voice and, overwhelmed by fear, begins to panic. The woman in the cloak promises Lados the throne and Rachel, skillfully playing on his sorrow and hidden ambition.